Good morning, everybody. We are starting the third day, because this is the third day of the Tirana Civil Society Forum. After a long, very long Thursday with one intro impulse, 4 panels, working group discussions, and also a joint reception with co-web members, and afterwards a working dinner, I understood. Now we will start the last leg of our forum, which will be composed by 2 main panels. The first one oriented into policy making with the presentation from Professor Bieber of the main findings of our previous work, what we have been doing on Wednesday and Thursday, followed by a presentation by Ms. Economy, the Minister of Economic Development, Tourism and Trade and Entrepreneurship in Albania, Her Excellency Susanne Schutz, the Ambassador of Republic of Germany to Albania, Mr. Svoboda, Member of Board, former Member of European Parliament for 18 years, and Vice President, former Vice President, and Mr. Peter Gurk, National Coordinator for Western Balkans, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia, and Mr. Karl Giacinti from DG NIR in Brussels. The panel will be moderated by Mr. Zico from Cooperation Development Institute and a senior expert at UN. We'll be joined shortly by Ms. Lunacek and Ms. Fayon, who arrived very, very late yesterday, at around 3 o'clock, I was told, there were some air flight issues. They are just, will join us in a moment. So the session is yours.
Thank you, Adrian. Good morning, everyone. Before just starting, I just wanted to share, I think, what everyone in this room would have, given the recent developments in our neighboring country, Macedonia, last night. Let's pray together that the events of the last night will be shortly resolved and in a peaceful and democratic way. So let's start the panel. Adrian gave a short introduction of every one of the distinguished members that we have today in here for the discussion, continuing what we discussed in the previous days. And just to get a summary of all the key issues that were discussed and on the preparations for the Trieste summit, I would like first to pass the floor to Professor Bieber, who would present shortly a summary of the key findings for the summit. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So basically, I will just share with you the findings of the discussions we've had yesterday. I will not be able to give every single one because we're having altogether over close to 20 recommendations which came out of the discussions in 4 areas. I should just for the benefits of the panelists, note that this was a 3-step process. There was a preliminary drafting of policy ideas and a background brief written by members of the Balkans and Europe Policy Advisory Group, which served as the basis for discussion. We had yesterday panels which picked up on some of the topics, and subsequently we had working groups on each of the 4 different areas we focused on, where we tried to hammer out specific recommendations. And then this is the product of this 3-step process, and it will be taken further in preparation for Trieste and be kind of specified and developed based on these specific suggestions. So I will mention a few key points which came out of the discussion. One group worked on youth cooperation, and one of the kind of 4 key messages which come out from that. And again, the messages are addressed sometimes to civil society themselves, sometimes to the European, different institutions of the European Union, member states, and the countries of the region, as with all of these recommendations. So when it comes to youth cooperation, one of the elements is to try to address the obstacles remaining in regard to mobility, which include such issues as, for example, ensuring the mutual recognition of diplomas in the region and ensuring that there are no more visa obstacles, in particular, both within the region and outside. Education and employment was another important issue mentioned, where the emphasis was on promoting more open intercultural learning in the region, and if there was a commitment of the ministers from the Western Balkan countries to move in that direction, that would be desirable and in a certain way engage in a more kind of clear measuring of the status of education and how to improve it. A better and their kind of cooperation between the RCC and RICO in research and better survey data on what is the situation, how do young people see their problems when it comes to brain drain, when it comes to other issues which concern them, to kind of probe deeper. And then finally, to also support RICO in its development of intercultural competences and in a certain way better understanding how to pursue the agenda it's been set up with even more, as well as also how to ensure to include both disadvantaged groups as well as young people who are no longer in the region, who've left already. So this gives you a sense of some of the topics which were mentioned as recommendations in the first group. When it comes to the rule of law, which again is a topic which is kind of pressing, not to mention because of last night's events in neighboring Macedonia. One of the elements which was mentioned is the importance of increasing the communication between the European Union and the civil society in preparing the reports, in the kind of communication both ways, to further develop the benchmarking system. Also to encourage governments to provide data, more usable, accessible, standardized data, which citizens and civil societies can use. That civil society itself would develop some kind of alternative benchmarking, some kind of mechanism to monitor regionally some of the issues, including high cases of corruption and so on. And then finally, the idea was to develop or to promote the data exchange in the region on issues of anti-corruption, which could be issues of conflict of interest, disclosure of assets, and to do that through the Regional Anti-Corruption Initiative. So again, you see there both the EU, the civil society itself, and the governments and other regional structures are involved in the recommendations which were drafted. The third group was dealing with the question of business environment and innovation. There, the discussions focused very much on how to promote entrepreneurship, in particular social entrepreneurship, in the region as a way to tackle not just high levels of unemployment, but also in a certain way re-energize the economic development. So there, the recommendations focused on promoting a social economy agenda in the Western Balkans to match the social business initiative of the European Union, to promote associations of professionals and SMEs in a certain way to be established and to be included in the policy-making process rather than being marginalized, and to have kind of regional efforts to promote venture capital and ethic banking mechanisms to promote this kind of innovative social business ideas, to ensure also that EU projects identify the countries of the Western Balkans as target countries, which means that it encourages that international European projects have partners from the Western Balkans as a result, which would create the capacities. And then finally, to share the success stories. We know of lots of success stories of business entrepreneurs, social businesses in individual countries, but there's no lessons learned across the region, and there is a lot of space for cooperation in this particular area. Then the final topic was the issue of bilateral disputes and issues, which has been, of course, on the agenda of the Berlin process for a number of years. Here, the key recommendations are that the governments reaffirm their commitment they've signed in Vienna to report and engage in every effort to resolve these bilateral issues and make progress, visible and tangible progress on this matter. And of course, the invitation stands for EU member states, especially the neighboring EU member states, to join this declaration, this commitment. And that on the other side, there should be a more sustained and systematic effort of EU member states and also EU institutions in assisting this process, so that there is more in building the momentum of the past to that these issues are resolved as we see they keep coming back. And then finally, when it comes to civil society, that there is more bilateral or multilateral monitoring of the development, both monitoring or by cooperation of civil society organizations from different countries, but also explaining to their constituents, to their publics, why these agreements need to be resolved, counteracting the challenges we've seen in recent years to the efforts to resolve bilateral issues. And though this is altogether gives you a sense of the discussion, I hope I reflected this well. I think there's also cross links which we mentioned between the groups. So, for example, the idea of youth cooperation is very much interlinked with the business environment and innovation, so that these are there are across these different fields a number of points which are important to consider, that youth cooperation might be given more substantial content and also encouragement by including issues of encouraging entrepreneurship among young people as a way to address the the dire economic situation of youth across the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian, very much for this introduction and well-said summary of all the colorful findings and broad areas that were covered in the discussions, and for the recommendations for the next summit. I would like to continue with Minister Economy that is present with us today, and perhaps you may shed some lights on two specific areas. One would be a bit more personal, given also your long experience with this civil society in the past, before the involvement in the government. How do you see the role of the civil society in this process? And second, which is more a bit specific to the work that you are doing, part of the activities that we discussed deal directly with the business environment and innovation issues, fostering entrepreneurship in the countries. Again, what's the role of the civil society in this direction, and how this process can move on forward in the future?
Thank you very much, Ilir, for giving me the floor and the opportunity to discuss about these two issues. How I see it in my old perspective, in my old position, and how I see it in my actual position. And I am very sure that the words that you have shared this morning about how interactive and how vivid was the discussion of yesterday is true, because usually among civil society there are a lot of ideas that need a place to be shown and a place to be discussed. So this forum are very interesting for this type of exchange. But from the other side, I can say that in civil society there is a plenty of opportunity to think how they can improve, how they can pose some question to the government, and how they can have ideas about the next action to be taken. But sometimes in the civil society you need a kind of being back in the reality according to the real possibilities, resources that are actually in position of the idea. And so if you ask me about this perspective, I think this is exciting to be in the civil society. But also from the other side, you have to have a measure of the resources that are available, that being part of the civil society, sometimes this dimension is not present. And then how I see it, the exchange of view in Balkan areas. I have been working for a while in Kosovo for a long period of time, not for a while, and I have the feeling that it was part of civil society that your government need to perform better. And this was an idea. And then it was articulated in a kind of document. And also you need to extend the borders. And the borders need to be extended with exchange of human capital, of financial resources, and also of different type of initiatives and different type of perspectives, that they can be different from the production process, from the innovation, and from different type of skills. And sometimes you need also administrative process that need to be in place to support the exchange of energies and ideas among Balkan countries. So having this in mind and looking the perspective in two countries of Balkan, but also I've been working for a very short period in Macedonia and also in Belgrade, and I have this perspective. I can share with you how I can see it in the point of view of being member of the government. In fact, one of the things you have to be very keen in delivery what is in an action plan agreed. So in my perspective is very much in my mind that we have a joint plan, a joint action plan. It's not easy to achieve a joint action plan because you need a lot of discussion, and civil society is part of those discussions. But you have to keep on going with these duties that are in the joint action plan. And I have been also a member of the Paris conference. And before going to Paris, we've worked a lot. We've worked a lot to prepare this joint action plan among Balkan countries. And the ministry that I'm working for, it's the ministry in charge for the exchange of trade in Balkan countries. And there are a lot of things that we can facilitate in barriers, trade among ourselves. And those type of activities are linked with experience that we have gathered from the past. So in these circumstances, the role of CEFTA was there, and we have an asset that we need also to consider that this has to be used for the future communication. And how we have seen CEFTA and what type of activities it has been done in Albania. So in CEFTA, perhaps some of you are also working with several research on CEFTA. We have to agree on protocols and type of protocols that need to be used. And lastly, all Balkan countries has worked on the addendum of the protocol number 5, or protocol number 5 addendum, which needs some preparation. And the preparation will start by agreeing among Balkan countries and bringing back this document in each Balkan country. And then the government of the countries need to ratify the addendum of the protocol number 5. In Albania, we have done that. So in Albania, we have ratified the protocol number 5, which allows some barriers in trade that are non-tariff barriers to be forget and to be used for the positive exchange of trade. And this situation needs to be moved on in Macedonia, in Kosovo, in Serbia, and in other countries. But this will facilitate the amount of trade that we are exchanging with each other. But to arrive in the protocol number 5, you have to do some of your homeworks in the countries. And those are linked with the type of, the size of small and medium enterprise, but also are linked with the type of reference that, custom reference that we are putting in place and making the small and medium enterprise having knowledge about this custom reference. And so this is a big issue that needs a big energy to be bring up to the end. But countries and administration has to work with this. So it's a political agreement because we would like to have the regional economic area, or so-called the single market. And to go on that direction, we need to work in protocols agreed among countries. There is another protocol that you are working, and I've seen that this is also part of RICO and also part of one of the fourth rights of movement between Balkan countries. It is the protocol number 6, which allows professionals to be exchanged among Balkan countries. And in each Balkan country, we have ratified some laws that knows the accreditation of professions. And right now, we have agreed for 4 professions, like doctors, dentists, architects, that need to be exchanged between each other. But do we have the same system of accreditation? Are the countries ready to make a face-to-face work between each other to see how they can move among borders, those type of professionals? And this is a duty that can be led by the government, but also I think that is plenty of work for academia, and also it's plenty of work for civil society. So this is why I see that civil society has a power to push the government to go, to have a certain speed. The other thing that is linked with the work that I'm doing right now is related with your 3rd chapter of recommendation, business environment and innovation. And according to the social business initiative of the European Union, what the countries has done in Balkan, I can tell you about Albania. Lastly, so 9 months ago, the parliament has approved the law on social enterprise, or benefit enterprises. And this means that now there is a possibility for the enterprise to have another shape how they are going to work vis-a-vis with marginalized groups and people that have no skills in the country. But a part of that in the Albania, and I think that in all Balkan countries, now that because it is also the bilateral cooperation that is working, but not countries to countries, but donor to each country, the Norwegian has taken initiative to make the ministries of economies to agree about the so-called corporate social responsibility, which is something that is also related with the Millennium Development Goals, because enterprises in the country has, or the big enterprises, has some, let's say, well-taken, self-taken, obligatory steps to improve some of the situation for the marginalized groups in the country. And in Albania, this is going on with some of big enterprises that are operating in the country. Another thing is that how we promote the capital to, or venture capital, and the role of the bank for those type of initiative that we have to consider that have to be consolidated among Balkan countries. I think that here we have to do a lot. In Albania, for example, justice system, I think that will help this process to go on. We have problems with the reinforcement of contract, and this is one of the main issues that if we are discussing about venture movement of capital between countries, we have to consider that these parts as a kind of homework that need to be carried out very fast. And another thing that is also important is how much we are considering programs that youth entrepreneurship has to enter in the picture. In Albania, we are doing activities. It's not enough. We have to do more, but there is a limitation of funds to go farther this budget limit that we have so far. I think that one of the most important issues is that how good governments are when they are facing programs coming from different donors, that they need to drive those programs to help the young entrepreneurship of this process. In Albania, we are trying to consider that. And lastly, we have different type of agreements with GIZ, and thank the ambassador that you support the idea that we have to consider one of the big package that are related with vocational training, because it's very important for the young professionals to have skills in different areas of business and production. So I do believe that what we have done so far in this regional economic area or a single market is something that need to go on. Countries need to have a different type of speed because they have different level of development. But there is something that we would like to agree together, and these are and this is the EU perspective. So we have target that we need to face, and these are directives and regulation of the EU. So this is what I see in all this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Economy, for the interesting insights on all the areas that you're covering, and also from your own experience with these issues. I would like to pass to Ambassador Schutz with the discussion on the issues that are related to the civil society, with the view that the political processes are extremely high on the agenda of most of the Balkan countries. As we saw from the discussions of yesterday, the civil society is able to promote cooperation among the various organizations. There are specific areas, as we saw in the presentations, where this cooperation could move forward in the future. I just want to ask for your views on how this cooperation could be strengthened in the future, and what the role of the civil society can be in terms of on strengthening this cooperation among the countries in the region.
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to start by commending everyone, and especially the organizers, for having been able to put together such a substantial list of recommendations. I know that expectations for the Trieste summit are very high for everyone, and so this is a real good initiative that you are doing. So actually we're already at a little bit at your question. What can civil society do, and how can civil society be included in the process more than has been before? Let me start by sharing with you that the German government has lately been rather concerned about the political developments in this region. And when looking back to 2014, when Germany, together with its partners, launched the Berlin process to commemorate the centennial of the First World War, we thought, rather than only looking backwards, we want to look forward and strengthen the relationship among the Western Balkan states, but also strengthen their relationship with the EU in the time that they are still not full members of the EU. And some things have developed positively, and for that I would certainly include RICO, which now has a headquarter here in Tirana. It has a general secretary. So things are moving forward, and I think hopefully soon there will also be concrete projects. But then there are other issues which are lagging behind, and that is the connectivity in energy, for example, road infrastructure. So still a lot needs to be done, and I believe that, of course, it's governments, it's the governments in this region, it's also governments in the European Union who are sort of the fathers and mothers of this initiative, and then there's the EU Commission, which plays a very important role. But it's the people as such who have to play actually the leading role in a process where we hope that countries which have been, well, sometimes even not so long time ago, at war with each other, and they need to build a basis for the future cooperation and future networking. Without strong people-to-people contacts, I believe these former war feelings in the region will not be able to be overcome. And that's why I think it's very important that you strengthened or that you stress the issue of networking among people, among organizations, among associations, among professional groups. All of that needs to be taken further. And civil society as such, as civil society, needs to play a stronger role in each of the countries itself, and then also in the region towards the EU member states and EU Commission. I have only been in Albania for what seems to be a few months, it's not a year yet, and I feel that civil society here in Albania should play a much stronger role than it does. There are political processes going on where sometimes, as an outsider, I look at it and I believe that people are not really taking part in games played by politicians. So really, people need to take on responsibility and also take up their demands and bring them into the political process and share them also with others in this region.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have agreed before starting this session with Minister Economy that she will have to leave because of an important government engagement. So on behalf of everyone, I would like to thank Minister of Economy for being with us. Thank you. And I would like to continue the discussion with Mr. Swoboda, who has been for a long time member of the European Parliament. He, as you may know, he has also been for a long time chairman of the Parliamentary Commission on Western Balkans. So with his experience in observing the developments in Western Balkans and the processes with which we are engaged as a civil society, I want to ask for his views on the importance of this process, especially in terms of bilateral relations between and among the countries in the region.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation and also this, I think, very comprehensive and wonderful points. Now, President, in some months, I'm president of the Center for Democracy and Reconciliation in Southeastern Europe in Saloniki. So to my dear colleagues from European Parliament, former colleagues, I may say there's also a life after our European Parliament. But they have a life also had before, so it's a transitional period, but a very interesting one. Now, but nevertheless, because of having been long-time politicians, I see, and I raised the issue yesterday already, that the economic and social issues are paramount for maintaining democracy and respect for civil liberties. And therefore, I think the first area here dealt with the economic issues are very, very important. Let me add perhaps only two elements of it. Everywhere in the world, but still, unfortunately, especially in that region, you have a lot of illegal activities where you earn a lot of money. And to fight against corruption and fight against illegal businesses is very important, because if young people see I have an alternative, a normal job, legal job, earning not so much money, and an illegal job where still the probability is very high that they will not be punished and earn a lot of money, some may go for the second element, way to earn money. And I think that's very bad for business in the long term. So therefore, I think it's very important to fight these issues, and there are some debates also in this country, but it's not only in Albania, it's in many other countries as well. So this is one element. The second element I want just to add, because it's about also here the young generation. We speak about infrastructure very often, and it was mentioned yesterday or the day before how important it is to have roads and sometimes maybe rail links. It's important, but we need also a strong digital, modern digital infrastructure, because if young businesses especially need the digital infrastructure, and it's not existing, it's very, very hard for them to survive. And the third point, maybe, what we need also in this region are several startup centers where you can go, can start your business without paying rent for 2 or 3 years. If you're successful, then you can go out and can continue in the normal business life. If not, of course, you have to change and have to find a new way. And these startup centers may be also in connection with the universities, also public universities. I see I just met a professor for finance here in Tirana, and I asked him, at what universities do you work? And he told me 2 universities, and said they are private. Say, of course they are private. I don't go to a public university. Now, maybe the image is worse than the reality. But it's very often I see some tendencies to say, okay, let's go for the private universities and the public do the minimum job. And that should not be done. And therefore also the startup centers with some sort of spin-off should be connected also with universities. And perhaps an idea looking very far away, maybe some of these startup centers could be cross-border centers. Of course, to dream it would be between Kosovo and Serbia. Even between Serbia and Croatia would be a dream nowadays. Maybe one can start between Kosovo and Albania. You know, the integration in the region is very important. We need many of these small elements. So this is to the first point, and second to the bilateral issues. Now, I have been involved. I was rapporteur for Croatia for the membership, and Tanja Fajon was sometimes still a journalist and tortured me with many questions from Slovenia. But I saw, when you saw the reality, I saw there's a big problem. Then I went to the Bay of Piran and spoke with the fishermen, and I think there were 5 or 6 fishermen who were affected by it. So what has been called yesterday demystification is very important. I missed this word here, maybe when we can include it. We have to demystify these big issues. At the end, they're really small. They're big because they have been made big by politicians, not because many people are involved. So this is one element. And here civil society can help much more than they thought, or they think very often, in coming together and say, let's look at the problem. What's the real problem? How many people are affected between the border issue? I don't know, it was Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Kosovo, Montenegro, and so on. How many people are really involved? Is it not a myth which has been created? And I think that could be very, very important. Now, they may be called traitors, but every good politician has to be called traitor at some time. But they can do a good job. And the second point, I have been listening a bit at the working group. The Commission is missing here. It's only the member states. The member states have, of course they should do more, but member states, you know, they are politicians who are affected with one or the other side. The Commission could do more. And of course also in the conflict at that time between Croatia and Slovenia, the Commissioner did, Olihan did quite a good job. The Commission can be independent, it is strong, it has the pressure of the European Parliament, which is also important. They don't like it, but they have to survive. And therefore, I think the Commission should not be left out of that. We deplored yesterday, when we got the news from Macedonia. My opinion is, and it's not only now, the Commission came too late and was too weak. Because it's not a problem which was arising in the last weeks. It's for years already. And we cannot look at it just and say, okay, maybe it will go easily and we will find a solution, or they will find a solution. No, very often they will not find a solution. And it's my firm opinion that also on Greece concerning the name issue and many other issues, the Commission or the European Union has to be firm, much firmer on some elements when they are not respected, not only because they want to join European Union, but because they want to have good relations with the Union. They want money. The money is spent for many projects, and they want to have it. Even the countries who, you know, complain about the European Union, also inside the EU, the money they accept, but the rules they are committed to, they very often don't accept. And here civil society can play an enormous role, and I think I would even strengthen that the civil society, of course, has to do the job amidst themselves, but also put much more pressure on member states, but also on the European Commission to go forward and not to look into developments where you could guess that they will create a disaster after some time. So again, this is some additional elements, perhaps underlining some of the things already in. I think it was a very good conference, or it still is, but of course the debates we had, and many good ideas came. And the important thing is, of course, to go from words to action. And I think many things have just to be done. And when they are done, politicians will have to react. I've been a politician myself for many years, and you cannot overestimate the pressure you can have on politicians if you just do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to continue with Peter. You're responsible as the national coordinator for the Western Balkans at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Slovenia. We noticed from the discussions that while progress has been made in many areas in terms of cooperation among the countries, still many bilateral issues have surfaced, posing frictions in this process of regional integration. Perhaps you may share your views on how the countries can tackle these issues, and especially what the civil society can do in this direction.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to this forum. Now, regarding regional cooperation, I think here there is one thing which is probably the most important. It's the active involvement of the European Union. We have to realize that, you know, in this territory 25 years ago there was still conflict going on. So, you know, it's hard to imagine that after 20-25 years these countries of the region are going to tackle the issue of enhanced regional cooperation by itself. This is why Slovenia, but also some other countries, have actively stepped up and put impetus into the whole issue of regional cooperation. This is why the Briuni process was initiated. This is why, at the end of the day, Berlin process was initiated, and this is why, you know, we have, I think I counted last time 77 initiatives in the region working on regional cooperation. Some of them are probably superfluous, some of them shouldn't, but at the end of the day, you know, you have them 77, which is always good when people come and talk and share ideas about how to enhance regional cooperation. Now, regarding the Berlin process and the future of the process, Berlin process is an efficient tool if it is seen as a complement to the enlargement process and not a substitute. This has to be very, very clear. It is efficient, on the other hand, if the things which are agreed in the Berlin process are also implemented. I think this is where we are lacking the progress. A lot has been agreed. If you look at the declarations from Vienna, from Berlin, from Paris, and probably you will see the same thing also in Trieste. The problem is a lack of implementation. I always say the problem is how to use time in between the conferences. You know, I never saw in my work as a diplomat a bad conference. You always have a success. You know, there is not such a thing as a bad conference. Even this forum is a success. Adrian, I'm joking. But the time in between, how you use the time between the conferences, this is, I think, the most important thing. And progress is being made. If we look how the first summit was prepared in Berlin, there was no really strong preparation before in terms of countries of the region talking and preparing themselves for the summit. And then slowly, now we have a process. Now we have a process. We have Western Balkans 6 meetings of the ministers, twice, 3 times on different levels: energy, transport, foreign affairs. We even had the Western Balkans 6 mini summit in Sarajevo as a preparation for Trieste. And at the end of the day, we have civil society forums, we have civil society engagement, which is, in my thinking, one of the most important things, because if you look at the agenda of the Berlin process, half of the things that are on the agenda were basically helped by or put in by the civil society. If we are talking about, which you mentioned, and also Hannes, bilateral disputes, this was something which was done in Vienna by civil society. If you look at positive agenda for the youth, which Slovenia is a very big proponent of, this was also something that civil society was highly and is still highly engaged in. If you look at rule of law, which is a new thing which is coming into the Berlin process, new thing in a sense that, you know, it was by civil society who detected that corruption, rule of law is one of the big issues in the Western Balkans, which we all know. And the Italian presidency picked it up. They're going to have a side event dealing with anti-corruption. It's a start. I know that civil society would like things to move forward much quicker than they do, but at the end of the day, you know, it's a start. So I think civil society should be proud of how it got involved into the whole Berlin process. But here, I would caution about one or two things. I think Berlin process in itself, it shouldn't become too wide with different topics, simply because, as I said at the beginning, it's not a substitute for enlargement process, it's a complement. And if it's a complement to the enlargement process, if you put heavy things on the agenda also of the Berlin process, there is a fear that the capacity, administrative capacity of the countries, of the governments in the region, is not big enough to efficiently tackle everything, you know, from the things that are in the Berlin process, from the enlargement process itself, from the negotiations chapters, and so on and so on. So we may be looking then at a situation where, you know, everything is being done halfway or not done at all. So what I would like to see first and foremost is, of course, implementation in all areas. You know, always glass is half full, half empty. It's the way of perception. It's always like this in politics, but especially in the politics in the Western Balkans. Yes, it's true. We established RICO, but as we heard yesterday, this RICO only has Secretary General and nothing else. It doesn't have money yet, it doesn't have a board, it doesn't have programs, it doesn't have anything. So, you know, we have to start implementing the things that have been agreed. For example, let's take soft measures, which is nothing, soft measures in terms of energy. This is, it doesn't mean infrastructure, it doesn't mean big money, it just means aligning the rules and legislation to the rules and legislation of European Union. It means, you know, sitting in the government sessions and making decisions. So the pressure which civil society is putting on these issues is, in my opinion, crucial. So this is two things or two ways how civil society can influence Berlin process. One is by substance, putting input into the whole agenda. And secondly, which I think is even more important, is putting pressure on the political elites in the Western Balkan 6 countries to actually deliver what they promised. And I think this constant monitoring is yielding some results, but in the future I hope it's going to yield even some more. And to answer your question, well, political circumstances are always difficult in the Western Balkans, as we saw yesterday in Macedonia, as we are seeing also in relations between different countries. How to tackle bilateral disputes in this regard? I think we have to be incremental. I mean, some of them are there to stay. I mean, we don't have to open them if there is not a point in them, you know, because if you steer pot too many times, then it becomes a problem. Sometimes, you know, it's better to be left alone. Some of them, yes, they can be addressed, but they need to be addressed slowly and with a lot of help from outside actors, especially from the European Union. And I think here yesterday we were talking on how this could be possible. But, you know, me who is a civil servant talking with the European Commission, we have a representative European Commission here, these kind of issues are very, very touchy and are very, very hard to tackle by the Commission, by the EU institutions. So it's going to take time, and it's going to take also, you know, some imaginative ideas from the civil society how to move forward. And one thing that Johannes said, and I agree completely, the mystification of these issues is crucial. Building an atmosphere of compromise, as I said yesterday, in the region. That compromise is not a bad thing, but it's something that is, you know, moving you forward to the final goal, and the final goal is membership in the European Union.
Thank you very much. Indeed, for some of the areas where, could you please pass the mic? For some of the areas that we see in the agenda, the integration might be easy, but also the benefits that the countries will get out of this process might also be minimal. Whilst for some of the other areas where potential exists and countries could benefit a lot, there are also challenges for all the countries to move forward in terms of this integration. And exactly from this perspective, I would like to ask Carl, who brings also the voice of the EU that was mentioned by almost all the speakers today in the meeting, but also in the previous sessions, where we could see the top priorities in all these areas in terms of regional integration in this region.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting the European Commission to this important event, and that is very much needed and welcome by the European Commission. Let me say that our director for the Western Balkans, Mrs. Weber-Ruiz Calavera, couldn't attend, but she's following very much these topics, let's say support to civil society and media freedom in particular. And so I'm bringing to you her greetings. Let me start recalling the strong condemn from the Commissioner on the situation in Macedonia. The Commissioner condemns the attacks on members of parliaments in the strongest way, and the violence has no place in the parliament and in the political arena. I will come back later on some of the comments that were made before, but let me give you an idea, or at least briefly recall, which are the guiding principles of our support to civil society, and then I will come back to the outcome of this forum and comment some of the recommendations, of course, not all of them. We think that it's part of European EU values to have strong civil society that promotes checks and balance in your societies, in your countries, and guaranteeing space for civil society organizations to operate freely is crucial. This is something on which the Commission is very much committed. The EC, the Commission strongly encourages enlargement countries to make legislation more conducive to civil society and to create adequate structures and mechanisms for civil society government cooperation. We are very much concerned regarding the present situation affecting civil society and particularly the media. And we are strongly committed to continue political support to civil society that is defending the very values the EU stands for. Maybe you have noticed in the recent visits of High Representative Mrs. Mogherini and Commissioner Hahn that whenever possible, meetings with civil society organizations were arranged in all countries to also to have your comments, your ideas on the situation in the different countries. I can assure you that also Mrs. Ruiz Calavera is very much interested and committed on these topics. A few words on the actual negotiation process. We believe that CSO's inputs is crucial and very relevant and could be very valuable. For instance, in the preparation of the action plans, the experience with Montenegro and Serbia, where different models are applied for, negotiation with civil society or discussion with civil society on the negotiations is it's positive. There is a commitment to continue with this process and to assure the effective participation of civil society in the negotiation process. It is important, we insist on that. For new future accession negotiation, we can tell you that the opinion process in Bosnia and Herzegovina, civil society is encouraged to contribute to the completion of the questionnaire, so we are ready preparing the ground for the involvement of civil society in that. Two other areas of cooperation with civil society that we see at the moment. Firstly, we are currently enhancing our communication strategy, putting a stronger emphasis on public diplomacy and outreach of EU values and policy priorities. We count on CSOs, on civil society organizations' help on that, to promote a better use of media and communication toward the citizens in the country. I think we can be ally on that. Secondly, we are planning to mainstream civil society into all sectors of our support, not only in financial terms, but also through information and consultations in the different sectors. We think the second mechanism in Serbia, for example, has shown that this can help sustainability and effectiveness of policies in different sectors. Last but not least, I'm coming from the unit dealing with financial assistance. At regional level, under IPA 2, we aim at committing around 3.5 of the overall budget available for IPA in the 7th year. So we are speaking about 400 million to civil society and the media. And a call for proposal, sorry, I have to do also some publicity of our work, a call for proposal for a regional network of civil society organizations where thematic priorities that were addressed in this forum will be in the call, will be issued soon. So 16 million will be soon be available to regional network of civil society organizations working on these topics. Coming to the Berlin process, we think the summit in Italy is a great occasion to confirm and relaunch regional cooperation on different topics. We are fully committed to support this process politically and financially. On youth cooperation in RICO, in the 30th anniversary of the Erasmus program, we recall the importance that similar mobility scheme can have in developing a sense of common identity and in promoting reconciliation. I think RICO is a success story of civil society government cooperation, and we think this should be highlighted. The Commission is supporting RICO, and funding for the functioning of RICO has been secured for the next year from the Commission. On business environment and innovation, we see a strong potential in the Western Balkans. We suggest focusing on local entrepreneurs, small, medium enterprises, and youth. We think Europe is a success story in the implementation of concepts as smart specialization, knowledge economy, green growth, and we can help to build this exchange of experiences that was mentioned as one of the recommendations in this field. we will support, we will help also in financing for business development. And at the summit will probably be announced an increasing of the budget of our Western Balkans Enterprise Development and Innovation Facility, EDIF, with a strong focus on the digital dimension, on opportunities for young entrepreneurs, and social economy. Also, social economy, it's a topic that we are more and more looking into, and in particular, our Center of Thematic Expertise on Civil Society. This also for you to have other reference also in DigiNear. It's working on that. To conclude, thanks again for inviting the Commission. As already mentioned, it will be my duty also to channel your messages to our management and to the colleagues in Unit D5 dealing with the different files, and of course also the political concerns regarding the more general support of the Commission in policy developments in the region, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl, for the comprehensive feedback and also for sharing some good news that we heard from you. That concludes the round of discussion of all the participants, and now is the time to open the floor for questions or comments that the participants might have. We have some minutes to go through that, so that I would appreciate that everyone who has questions may just ask and briefly introduce yourself and the organization that you represent. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Adi Cherimagic. I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina from the European Stability Initiative think tank. I was wondering, I'm interested in the new communication strategy because, and I have a question, because when we look at the connectivity agenda, something that worries me in the past couple of months is that the entire story about the connectivity agenda and infrastructure receives enough public attention and enough public enthusiasm. For example, as much as an offer that came from Turkey for a road from Sarajevo to Belgrade. And that is something that is interesting because with everything that the connectivity agenda is doing, it has not managed to gather so much enthusiasm as the road from Sarajevo and the promise by Turkey to finance the road from Sarajevo to Belgrade has done in the past 2 months. And what I did is I called the Turkish embassy and asked what exactly would they finance in this road from Sarajevo to Belgrade. And they told me that it's just feasibility study for the road and that the road itself is not planned to be financed. But the PR, everything that's surrounding it was very enthusiastic and very well followed. And the other thing is when the Sarajevo summit was, they had the opening ceremony for the bridge between Bosnia and Croatia. And we needed just half an hour to find out that that bridge was already opened just 6 months ago, which was there was an opening ceremony where Croatian minister and Bosnian minister took part in it. And I have to say that in that sense, communicating what the EU is doing, I fear, is not going very well. That's why I want to know more about the communication strategy and whether you plan to communicate what the actual accession process and benefits of the accession process for citizens are. If we think about the countries in the region, in many of these countries, for example, air pollution is something that is a problem in all the countries, but we cannot see quite a lot of EU explaining what the EU acquis, EU strategies, and the EU standards in this area can help improve the situation in the countries. And yes, just not to make it more lengthy, but I'm very much interested in how you plan to do it. Thanks.
Thank you. Is it working? Yes. Well, as you said, the Commission, the European Union realized that probably on that we are not very good in communicating our you know, our also the results of our action. I remember an article from, I think, Der Spiegel was exactly recently, a couple of months ago, underlined how European Union it's not good at all in give relevance in outreach on the success stories of, for example, our programs, Juncker's plan for development and so on. And while other actors are very, very active, not only the Turkish, but also Russia, we don't know. At the moment, it's very, very active and, in the Western Balkans and other areas. So we are developing communications. I cannot be more precise than that. I mean, I'm not directly in charge for that, but much more work, much more attention to public diplomacy. So role of our representatives when visiting the countries, when having contacts with local institutions, give much more evidence to that, much more attention in the use of social media, in giving more space to our arguments, our messages, and yes, and also all our programs, our initiatives, our financial support, visibility, now it's a constant attention to give visibility to the outputs, results, etc. These are the let's say, the main points of that, and I'm sure I can provide you additional info if you want.
Thank you. My name is Franz Müller. I work for the Erste Foundation in Vienna. And as we have the representative of Germany and the representative of DG NEAR on the podium, I wanted to ask, we have been discussing here what our contribution as civil society organizations can and should be to the Berlin process and to specifically to the summit meeting in Trieste. And Professor Bieber has given us the results of yesterday. But underlying that discussion is concern of what will happen after 2018. Supposedly we are going next year to London. The colleagues from the Foreign Office were here or are here, but what then? And I think we from civil society see this process as something that needs to go on, a consultation, a process of even perhaps cooperation between governments, civil society. And I would like to ask both of you, what's your perspective on the process that has been started in Berlin and that has brought back, in a way, the issue, the topic, the concerns, and the willingness to relate and include the Western Balkan countries in a larger European discussion, and how can that continue post-2018?
As you mentioned, or as you mentioned actually earlier, the idea started in Berlin 2014, and it was initially an idea, and it developed into a process with lots and lots of initiatives. 77 initiatives is really quite a large number. So we support the fact that this process will continue after 2018. Initially, it was the idea that the countries which participated, or some of the countries which participated in the First World War, would be part of this, and it would be the period 1914, 1918, 2014, 2018. But as this process has developed into a process, and as there are lots of initiatives, which I also share, are not a substitute for EU membership, but there are additional initiatives which shall bring the countries closer together, we're absolutely convinced that it will continue. In which format it will continue, it has to be seen. We still believe it might be too early for the countries of the region to be left alone without the help of the EU member states and the Commission. I'm sure that eventually this process will have to go beyond the countries which started the initiative, but all of that will still be under discussion. But we believe that the process is a success story, and it will hopefully bring the countries closer together while they are fully thriving for membership. And there, I believe the countries in the region should also do more in fulfilling the EU values and standards, and that is among them the rule of law and democracy. So.
For the Commission, we would like to see the region taking more ownership on the process. Of course, we agree that this cannot be completely handed over to the country themselves, but it is for the region to define how they see the future developments and what support they want from the EU. Of course, we are there, we are helping, willing to support, but again, we would like to see more ownership on that. On the next here summit, we know that there is no clear decision. We hope that we will arrive to Trieste with a clear idea, where the summit will going to take place.
Thank you. We have a question from the lady there.
I'm Hedwig Morway from the European Fund for the Balkans and basically the co-organizer of this forum. Our initial idea was, with the program today, to sort of test the recommendations, what we formulated during the work the whole day yesterday, because those recommendations should travel to Trieste and to find their way somehow into the political agenda of the political summit, because we will be present in Trieste as we were present ever since Vienna on the occasions of the annual summits. However, this debate should also put some light on this very important question of the future of the Berlin process. Just as Franz Karl mentioned before me, I think we need to use every opportunity to raise the awareness about the importance of thinking in time about how this process should develop, because next year it's over. So I really think that it's the last time to start a serious strategic thinking about the process. And we as representatives of civil society are very much concerned about the situation in this region. And if we mention ownership, I think we should think not twice, but 10 times about what do we really mean by that under the given circumstances if we just look around and the most recent developments we have in the region. And the fact that there are 77 initiatives involved in the Berlin process means that the region needs all kinds of assistance next to the accession process, which is a question itself, whether the accession process as it is brings really what it should bring and achieve in the region. So I think there are many, many serious issues about the strategic views and visions for this region. And these new visions, new strategic ideas must be formulated very quickly, and giving to the region the ownership about its own destiny right now is a very, very dangerous idea. Thank you.
I fully agree with Hedwig. I think that was a very important statement. But then we need a first introductory paragraph or whatever in order to make clear what we want for the process. Because the question was here to the German ambassador and to the Commission, but they could ask, what do you want? And I think what you said is very important, and we should say what is the relationship between increased ownership, which we support, but on the other hand, say very clearly, in view of actions we see today, it's not the time for it, because that could be an excuse for member countries and Commission to say, look, it's your job. So I think a formulation which, quite rightly, as you said, would make it clear what the civil society expects for the future, not only on the different subjects, but how the whole process should be organized, including, of course, the involvement of civil society would be very important. And maybe Florian Bieber and some of you could sit together and make that introductory statement of demands of the civil society, what we want from the process as such, and not only on the detailed question. That would be, I think, very important.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the Berlin process is going to continue. I think that's a fact, simply because everybody is in agreement that the job is not done. If you talk to the European Commission, if you talk to the member countries of the European Union who are involved in the process, if you are talking to civil society, if you are talking even to the political elites and governments in the region. How it's going to continue, as Hedvig said, I mean, this is up to the debate, but I would urge again, you know, we shouldn't in 6 months or 1 year time open the same bridge again in Sarajevo. You know? I mean, if we are going to do that, then, you know, this whole process doesn't make a lot of sense. So the continuation of Berlin process is also going to depend on how successful it's going to be to translate the agreement into practice. And I think where, you know, it's going to happen, it's not so important. It's how it's going to happen and what the results are going to be. This is, I think, the guiding light that we should follow. You know, this bickering where, how, I mean, this is politics. We will agree on something at the end of the day, we always do. But it's much harder to agree on, you know, not to open the same bridge again.
Thank you, Peter. I think we have time for a couple of more questions. The gentleman in the table there. Yes.
Thank you very much. Nenad Šebek, the director of the Heinrich Bell Foundation office in Belgrade. But I'd like to take off that hat for what I would like to say first and put on the hat of just a citizen of the Balkans. Ownership, yes, absolutely. Ownership is a wonderful thing, but it reminded me of a saying by one of my favorite cynics, George Bernard Shaw, who said, I paraphrase from memory, democracy is a device which ensures we are governed no worse than what we deserve. Now, he was a cynic, and this is a very cynical thought, but it has a lot to do with the reality in which we live in. Therefore, we do need the Berlin process, and I was encouraged by hearing the German ambassador. Maybe I misunderstood you, but from what I heard was maybe my wishful thinking, which is that Berlin process will continue in one shape or form or another. Because I do believe that we need the Berlin process. I see it as a most useful instrument, together with the European Commission's activities in the enlargement, or whatever passes for enlargement these days, which is a top-down process, a top-down activity, and I see the absolute necessity of what the civil society is doing and what we have been doing here over the last three days. And I'd like to thank the organizers and Hedvig and everyone who's here involved. We need this bottom-up pressure as well. With these two factors in the play, the region will make progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then, the floor is yours.
Thank you, good morning. My name is Peter Bainbridge. I'm from the Foreign Office in London, and we're very much looking forward to hosting next year's summit. One thing that has come out of these last 3 days is the issue of monitoring and evaluation. You know, if you look at every summit, every declaration, you know, I don't think there's anything that anyone would disagree with. How do you actually maintain, I'd be really interested in the panel's views in terms of how do you actually maintain the momentum? How do you actually monitor and evaluate, you know, what government leaders have signed up? So I'd be very interested in the panel's views in terms of what they think would be the most effective way. Picking up on an earlier colleague who mentioned the importance of communication and actually being able to demonstrate to the region what the Berlin process is delivering. And then the second point is about the fact that there are 77 regional initiatives under the Berlin process. what is the most effective way to prioritize? Because you can't do everything at the same time. What do you think is the most effective way to actually ensure that the Berlin process delivers a real impact on the ground?
Yeah, thank you very much. I didn't say that there were 77 regional initiatives under the Berlin process, but in the region. Most of them are, of course, also tied up into the whole Berlin process agenda. How to monitor the process? As I said in my previous statements, I think European Commission here is already doing, let's say, a good job. It's not a great job, but a good job of trying to monitor what was already done. But you know, this is just one side of the story. I mean, you can monitor as much as you want if you don't have a site which is, ready to implement what was agreed. So in this sense, you have, I think, two approaches are needed. And I think this approach of two folds is already shaping up. One is Western Balkans 6 arrangement, which is led by European Commission, where you have government officials sitting and evaluating what was done, what needs to be done, and so on and so on. I think this is going on pretty well. You have ministers of transport, you have ministers of energy, you have ministers of foreign affairs who are meeting regularly in that format together with the Commissioner Hahn, and in this sense, European Commission is doing a great job. On the other hand, you also need a grassroots approach, and here is where civil society comes in with its evaluation. I think what Ardian did and his institute is something to look forward to and needs to be replicated also in the next years. To go through the topics and to see this was done, this was not. At the end of the day, we are always talking about the strategy. I mean, I think we also need a little bit of demystification of the Berlin process. It is a strategical thing, it's a tool, it's an instrument how to tie the region closer to the infrastructural, energy, economical, youth corridors of the European Union. But on the other hand, it's really hard work. It was done so that practical connections could be made. And this is what we have to monitor, and this is what we have to establish in the future.
Thank you, Peter. Time for the last question. Floor.
Just to get to the mic. Hello, my name is Milena Lazarevic. I am program director of a Belgrade-based think tank, European Policy Center. And yesterday in the Rule of Law Working Group, we discussed a little bit about the potential for civil society to increase and instigate and initiate positive competition or regional peer pressure among governments in the areas of rule of law, for example. We know that the governments very much compete on who is going to rank better on the doing business ranks and those things where they feel that there is real money involved, where foreign investments and some economic parameters depend on it. Of course, in the area of rule of law, money is much less visibly dependent on this, although everyone tries, especially in the civil society, to frequently make the case that rule of law is equally important for foreign investment as well. But I think we have also been a bit less, let's say, a bit less successful and effective in communicating this and making it clear and visible. So I would be interested in hearing, for example, Mr. Svoboda's opinion, but also anyone else who might want to pick up on whether you think that it is feasible and whether you think it can be effective to try to instigate this kind of a positive competition among the governments, for example, on who is going to rank better on the Bertelsmann Transformation Index, or for example, I'm trying to think of the other indices, anti-corruption corruption perception index of the Transparency International, etc. So do you think that we could, as civil society, and I think it could be our role to try to instigate this kind of positive peer pressure among the governments, do you think it could be effective? Do you think it would make sense to do that? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it is connected also with what we just discussed. De facto, we have these yearly reports by the Commission. The Council is doing its job. The Parliament is doing its job and looking critically to these reports. But it's very difficult to compare the judgment on one country with another country. Gerald Knaus from the European Stability Initiative made a counter-proposal how the enlargement process should go, in saying, let's open negotiations and have a list of points where you can then say, okay, fulfilled, half fulfilled, nothing, no progress at all, for each and every country. So at least from the general structure, it would be easier to say, well, Serbia has done well in the economic field, but on media, it's terrible, whatever. And the other country, I think we have to think in these terms, as was said before also, to have, we have three levels. We have the EU level, Commission, and Council, and so on. We have the national levels here, and we have the civil society. And we would need a checklist for all three of them, what has been done successfully since the last event, the last summit. But, as you said, one of the points, and maybe it could be even added here on that list, should be really to elaborate from the civil society, together with some of these institutions like the European Stability Initiative and others, a structure where the comparison can be done in a serious way on the question of democratic development, corruption, fight against crime, whatever else should be done. I think that would be very valuable, because we very often discuss in a very, let's say, soft way without going to the hard facts, what has been done. And that could be also a good debate for the parliamentary, or for a debate between government and opposition, because then the opposition could say, look, you say always we are good progress, but on these and these points there is no progress at all, and the civil society can do it. So I think to have a comparison on a more or less scientific, well-founded basis between different countries, what they do in the different fields of promoting democracy and respect for civil rights would be absolutely important. And there are already some elements existing. And it would be very good to bring them together and to prepare some of the list. And maybe the discussion interest could be a start also for that, to do that and prepare that for the next summit in London or wherever it will be. So as long as London is still part of the European Union, we should take perhaps the chance, and maybe that they will be engaged in the Balkans even afterwards, maybe even in coordination with the Commission. You never know. Let's hope. But that is it's a very good idea, and I think we should promote it very, very concretely.
I think we are on time. So a quick question, last question? Yes, please.
It's going to be a very quick one. My name is Samira Nuhanovic from Mosaic Foundation, Bosnia and Herzegovina. My question is directed to a functional role of civil society within the Berlin process. It is my understanding that somehow civil society has had to impose itself on the process and put spotlights on ourselves and say we can be partners in this. Is there any thinking that along the lines that civil society should become fully integral part of the process, so that we don't have to think about what the role of civil society will be in London, for example? Because I think given the state of affairs of bureaucracies and administrative apparatus in all of the countries, civil society can become a resource, not just someone who will write evaluations and reports. We can do the work. Thank you.
Reaction?
I mean, whenever you ask the governments, should the civil society be involved, first thing they will say is no. So at the end of the day, that you imposed yourself on the Berlin process and that the governments realized that you bring an added value is already a great thing. So this imposement was something that needed to be done, because the initiative had to come from your side, and this is good. In terms of what will happen in the future, I think the civil society aspect of the Berlin process has become a fact. now, you know, now when you start planning, when all the presidencies start planning for the summits, they always include the civil society forum, they always include the meeting also on the margins of the Berlin process. And I think if it's going to be in London or anywhere else, this cooperation between the governments and the civil society inside of the Berlin process is going to continue, and maybe it's going to be even strengthened. How? You know, this is the venues, the forums that we have to use in order to see how this could be even more efficiently done.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank the distinguished participants in this panel for their time, but also for sharing with us the interesting insights that we heard. Now it's time for a short break, and we come back for the last session, which devotes to the relations between the citizens and the European Parliament. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We are welcoming in this panel, which is the last panel of the Civil Society Forum in Tirana, some very distinguished guests. I will give immediately the word to the moderator, Mr. Tobias Pessenkamper. Please take your seats. But before starting, we have been following, I wanted to get your attention for 2 minutes. We have been following very closely what is happening in Macedonia. And we have got many requests from our colleagues of civil society in there. And we have got information, we have asked about what's going on there, about their well-being, the general situation. And we have got many requests from you, from the members of the civil society, from the participants of the civil society in Tirana, to come up with a strong statement of support for peace and stability in Macedonia and for avoidance of any violence, and as a statement of a strong support from us to our colleagues of civil society in Macedonia. So if you are all okay with this, I wanted to make it public. We will draft a statement and we will publish it as one of the recommendations and one of the strong statements of the Tirana civil society. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you. Cheers.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Ardian said, this is basically the concluding panel of 3 days of hard work on the Civil Society Forum in Tirana in the run-up to the Trieste summit that is going to happen on the 12th of July under the Italian chairmanship of the so-called Berlin process. I think, thanks to Ardian, thanks to the European Fund for the Balkans, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and of course many others like the CDI, we have produced quite a number and a substantive number of recommendations, of policy recommendations, reflection. And what I find most important in a way, it's now an established fact that civil society is a pillar of this process, which is called the Western Balkan process, that should help the region to advance on its European integration, but also, of course, to foster regional cooperation. Now, of course, you cannot do regional cooperation nor European integration without politicians. That's why the organizers actually said, let's invite the elected representatives of the people. Let's invite European and national politicians and to engage them directly in a dialogue. So far, we have discussed very much with diplomats, with representatives of government, but here are really the people who are representing us and make laws for us and decide on the future of the European Union and of the respective paths of the countries in the region. So I'm very pleased to welcome here on this panel Majlinda Bregu, to my left. She has been a member of the Albanian Parliament for many years, chairperson of the European Integration Committee, or its National Committee for European Integration. You will correct the title of the exact name of the committee or the institution, yet a very powerful player in the European integration process. To my right, Ulrike Lunacek, Vice President of the European Parliament, Rapporteur for Kosovo, many other functions, has been engaged both in civil society and in the Western Balkans. Next to my Linda Tanja Fajon, who many of us worked with quite intensively during the exciting times of visa liberalization. Unfortunately, as you know, an issue not completely concluded in the Western Balkans when we look at the situation in Kosovo. And I don't think I need to introduce Hedwig Morvai. Yet I think it is important to cherish the achievement that Hedwig and her team at the European Fund for the Balkans has really put into this rather difficult, complex process of keeping civil society together. And to my very left, Ardian Hatshai from here from our host in Tirana. The title of the session is How to Connect Western Balkan Citizens to the European Parliament. That's a very narrow focus. So I actually took the liberty to enlarge the focus, and I will give my panelists a little bit of time to reflect about it, but it's actually, I would like us to discuss more on how to reconnect citizens to the democratic process and the European project. And then we should look maybe in a second round at some more kind of operational recommendations with regard to European institutions and Western Balkan civil society. Before we do this, I'd like to invite Felix Henkel from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation Southeast Europe Dialogue Program to give us a little bit of a feedback from the Skopje Civil Society Forum. And he's doing this on behalf of, not on behalf of, but instead of Vedran Džihić, who unfortunately had to go back for family reasons tonight. So, but Felix was one of the co-organizers of the Skopje Forum, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Honorable members of parliament, dear friends and colleagues. I'm not sure if I can do this as nicely as Vedran would have. He has a wonderful energy, and I'm not sure if I can muster that in this morning, but nevertheless, I'm very happy to just say very few words, maybe a little bit more philosophical than what Vedran would have done, because when I think about this conference and also the whole process that we've been supporting from the very beginning as the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, there are really two dimensions, and I would call them, one dimension is the material. We have developed at least 20 very concrete and excellent policy recommendations that will be fed into the process in Trieste, but then there's also something like an immaterial dimension of this, which has to do with consciousness and with understanding of oneself as members of this civil society in the Western Balkans and also throughout wider Europe. We started addressing this immaterial dimension actually in Paris with an evening forum that we organized together with our partners from European Alternatives on the question of whether solidarity in Europe. And I remember, I think it was Jacques Rupnik who said, well, solidarity, that's a term from the 80s. Or, it's very, very 20th century anyways. I believe the action that you just took regarding Macedonia, talking about consciousness, talking about solidarity, shows that it really is not a term from the past century, but it is very urgent and current and recent and relevant today. And we've had interventions throughout the discussions on the policy dimension that were actually stressing that theme and also the importance of values. Now, what do we do in Skopje? We tried to take a look at this democracy, social justice, and Europe, and somehow reflect on the fact that those terms have been hijacked by official discourses, by government representatives who are using those terms, and also counterparts actually in Brussels and other European capitals who are using those terms, but they're actually void of meaning. It is often more of a coalition that we also discussed many times, where the one side pretends and the other side pretends, and it's all a very pretentious exercise. So the idea was to come together and reflect on those terms and reclaim them from civil society, fill them again with some meaning. What do we mean by democracy, by social justice, and by Europe? That was the impetus. That is what we believe this process should be about, and I'm thrilled that we have members of the European Parliament here to make this connection to this grassroots energy that we also as a foundation are trying to harness to talk about values in addition to the policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felix. My Linda, sorry, you know, it's always advisable to read the document. Actually, it says here European Integration Committee Chair, but I seem to remember that actually there was another committee in Albania dealing with European integration, bringing together different forces, including from civil society, and that has a term of National Commission for European Integration or something. Felix just said that terms have become void of meaning. Now, if you look at the role of parliaments, the role of the opposition, the role of, you know, the national politics in European integration, is there a gap that has opened between these processes? Is what the European Union asks, say, from Albania, actually meeting the expectations from the citizens? Can then Parliament, US parliamentarian, can you translate those demands coming from Europe and bridge the gap inside the Parliament with everyone else? And can you communicate it back to the citizens?
Mirdita. So hello to everybody. I was told the working language is English, even that while there is media in front of us, it's better to do it in Albanian. Otherwise, somebody will be lost in translation, and these are really hard days for everybody, so I should be really, really too much concerned even on the commas that I will say today. Well, I would have only a short answer on what you said. By the way, it's called National Council on European Integration.
So, National Council on European Integration.
If I could paraphrase it put it in one word, it's going to be almost. So if the parliament or the civil society could really be so much heard and influential on the parliament and on the other way around. And when I say almost, I should say that personally, I'm deadly afraid from almosts. And unfortunately, that's what's happening every day. And that's, I think, it's the main challenge of civil society as well. Because the civil society role should be that to organize and to have a civil opinion and criticize the institutions or help them to be developed better and to have a better shape. And the role of politics and politicians, on the other hand, is to go ahead, move through reforms, promise whatever they think it's achievable, even then lately I do believe that politicians promise what is not achievable. But then good politics makes you successful. Bad politics doesn't make you successful, or only might make you successful for some days, but at the very end it's definitely suicidal. So I would really like to see very much civil society role, especially in Albania, to be more and more, not only enhanced, but positive aggressively towards what's happening, the goods and bads that are part of our daily life. But still, and I'm afraid this is a problem of the civil society everywhere, that should take into account the level of their accountability and the level of their responsibility to the citizens. This is something that is not present. I'm afraid that civil society in all our countries in the region has been, or it is, part of the current malaise that is present everywhere. And not so strong, really, to call on us and make us really feel weak, that if we don't hear the voice from people that civil society supposedly should represent, then something not good is going to happen. And when I say that, it's because sometimes I know that civil society, the main challenge of some civil society organizations is either money, so funds, and then it's you and somebody might be easily cursed if their main focus is going to be only who is going to be the next donor for me. When it comes to Parliament and to this National Council that I was chairing for 2 years now, because it was lately established, there are 5 seats in this National Council that are reserved to civil society. At the beginning, we thought that 3 of them, 3 strong, good representatives would be enough. And then we only offered 3 seats for them, because all the institutions are represented there. It happened that those who applied were only 5. And then I said, okay, so let's extend it and give 2 more seats. But I really didn't expect it that so few organizations would have applied for that place in the National Council for European Integration. And let me be enough open and frank with you. In 2 years of time and happenings and developments of this council, not an issue was brought by civil society to be discussed. Whatever the theme of the meeting was, okay, some people, some out of the 5 were participating actively. Others were just having a seat in there. Now I would say, is this a challenge that I would like civil society to pose to politicians or independent institutions that are present in the room? Is this a challenge that civil society should face alone? Or are university people as well should be considered part of the civil society? Are business community people part of the civil society? Is media on one hand? Could we say that media is somehow part of the civil society, since they all should represent another voice out of politics? That's why I really come back to that word that I mentioned at the beginning, almost. Last year, in summertime, we were having our difficult time as politicians to convince ourselves on the vote on the judicial reform. And it happened only 2 days ahead of the deadline of the vote in Parliament, when things were still unclear, that some civil society organizations asked for a meeting of the National Council. And believe me, at that time, everybody that was being present in there, part of the government, but even different MPs, were really, really angry for that. They didn't want it at the very last moment, any person out from politics, to tell them what to do, or at least suggest them what to do. And then you feel that if civil society was going to exercise that pressure rightly, ahead, in time, with good opinions, strong voice, strong stand-ins, then people will be accustomed to the idea that they are not considered, while you are in politics, you are not God on earth. And that made me think that it's not that it should come as a call from us, from politicians, to call the civil society to be more active, intervene, and offer some thoughts and ideas, or to shake us, politicians. It's from the civil society itself. So I still say almost that role is present in Albania. As you know, Albania, if it's not going to happen at the beginning of 2018, I hope it will be. I hope that it will be a good year, 2018, but still that opening of negotiations is there, and civil society will have a bigger role in that. I'm pretty much doubtful, I would say, that we could really identify strong people with civil and independent opinions to be part of those discussions during the negotiations. I'm not saying of the negotiating teams. And by that I'm still repeating myself, so I don't consider civil society only NGOs. I'm saying even business community and university as well. All of those who could bring in a voice whatever they think it's wrong or how they would like to see things improved. Yeah, I'll stop here because I see that you have a question.
We have some other people on the podium.
Oh, I thought it was for me.
No, Melinda, I think this is very important to throw back the ball a bit into the room, which I think will make for a good discussion now. But let's maybe move on a bit also to a European Union perspective quickly, if I may.
Thought you were giving.
From a European Union perspective, and I like what we just heard, almost. We seem to be living in a time of almost, and I think couple of us watched the European Union Parliament debate these days, and Viktor Orban was there. And Viktor Orban was, you know, in the European Parliament, and there was a bit of a discussion about almost meeting our own ambitions with regard to democratic values, almost meeting our own ambitions in the European Union with keeping people or holding people accountable to their actions. And also, almost there was some civil society mobilization to put Viktor Orban on the spot. Will we be overcoming almost at some stage with regard to people like Viktor Orban who are actually not living up to the expectations of how we want to build our European project?
Well, first of all, also thanks for all the organizers for having this civil society forum in preparation of Trieste. And I hope it's going to be a strong voice in Trieste as well at the summit. And thanks also for having me and also with Tanja Fajon, two MEPs here. Almost. Well, I'm an optimist, even though situations are not easy at all. But I always think that, yes, it's possible to change things and make things better. So that's what my struggle is. And maybe it has to do with the fact that I myself come from civil society. I've learned it sort of struggling for things in my home country, Austria, at a time when civil society wasn't liked much by governments either. I mean, not that any government really loves civil society, because it is a constant criticism is something that is not easy for human beings to accept. Yeah? And but nevertheless, I mean, in the EU, we are losing, and I and many of us have been saying that in the parliament for a long time, we're losing credibility, also like two countries in the enlargement process, like the Western Balkans, if we're not credible inside with authoritarian tendencies, like we have, and not just tendencies, acts that we have, like in Hungary, like in Poland. But we had them even before. Remember Berlusconi times on media, where also it wasn't, we missed in the European Parliament, it's when I just started working in the Parliament in 2009, we missed a vote criticizing Berlusconi's media power by, I think, 3 votes, yeah? So, but I mean, there was debates about it, but we are not, in many facts, not credible when we talk to you. I know that, and I've had questions from civil society governments in the Western Balkans telling us, well, why do you want us to be strict on media pluralism, to really support critical media, independent media, civil society, all that rule of law, if you don't do that inside, yeah? This weakens us as European Union, and that is something that many in the parliament criticize. I mean, and it has to do also with, let's be clear on that, with party families, yeah? If EPP now, what do we have today, Friday? Tomorrow is having their assembly, and there the debate whether to exclude Fidesz and Viktor Orban is going to happen or not, is going to be a debate. Well, finally, yeah? I don't know whether they're going to do it, but this is, and we all come, at least Tanja and myself, we come from, and Melinda, from political families. And yes, sometimes we have members that don't live up to what we want. So I think that has to be taken seriously. And I think in this case, and also when it comes to the Western Balkans, and we have the situations we have in neighboring countries here and here, we should demand from the political parties, where those who don't live up to standards are part of, that it's not just talking behind closed doors and telling them what to do, and then in public keeping being friends, but making it very clear that certain acts simply are not acceptable, and not go to visit them and support them in election campaigns when you know they're not doing the right thing. This has to be said, and I've said that to the Austrian foreign minister when he visited Macedonia and Gruevski just before the elections. I think this is really the wrong thing to do. We have to live up to the standards and to the values that were talked about, that we present. Otherwise, we're not more, and that weakens everybody, and that weakens human beings, that weakens people who are courageous enough in difficult situations to say what needs to be said. Because this is simply, and Melinda, you mentioned at the beginning as well, it is about courage, it's about not needing to live in fear. That's what it turns up to. Even like issues like corruption have to do with that. Yeah? And that's what, as human beings, we are here for. I mean, we are supposed, and now as politicians as well, to make sure that citizens can live lives without fear. That's what it is. And become a lot of, be happy and content with what we have. And this is at the essence of societies. So that's why I very strongly defend the necessity to have civil society as a kind, I always call it like the fifth pillar in society. You have in states, you have the three, legislative, executive, judiciary, you have media as the fourth pillar, and civil society is the fifth one. And criticism is, I call it the salt of democracy. If we do not accept it and support it, we lose touch with society and we make people afraid. And I know that myself. I said, I come from civil society. I changed that. I'm now a parliamentarian for a long time. And sometimes I get criticized by people I worked with before because I have a different role now as well. And it's not easy to accept that. But if you don't allow that, if you don't also try to convince with arguments, and not with closing down media or civil society by not funding them anymore, yeah? Or telling people, well, somebody of your family won't have that job anymore if you write that, if you say that. I mean, then where are we? And this applies to inside the EU, and this applies to here as well. And that, for me, that's why I really think fora like this are so important. And I hope media are here to report about it, because that's also the thing, and that media dare to write about it, and that this is supported, yes, even with money by governments and by the EU. Because that's what we have fought for since the French Revolution, that you dare to speak out. That's why I'm, as Vice President of the European Parliament, I'm, among other things, in charge of the Sakharov Prize Network. Sakharov Prize for freedom of thought. That's where it starts, because if you don't dare even to think that things could be different, then how will you be able to speak or to act? So that's just this thing of, we need also, like in schools and in families, you need to, in families as well, I mean, you need to learn as a child, as a young person, also to contradict your parents. Like you should in school have debates with teachers, dare to also say things that they don't like to hear. Otherwise, how will you be adults that then dare to speak out and challenge those who want to go back into what we had in the 20th century and in this part of Europe not so long ago? Wars fought for nationalist and authoritarian reasons. I'm getting too long, but that's, I think, the main thing I wanted to say at the beginning. Thanks.
Thank you, Ulrike. A life without fear. Now, it seems that this ambition, we're not really meeting it in the candidate countries to the European Union. If I look at Turkey, for instance, and also if you look at the neighboring country here. Tanya, at 2215, probably at the airport changing the plane to come here, you sent a tweet and you said, like, what's gone wrong with democracy? And you were referring to the events happening in the parliament in Skopje. Now, was that a democratic process there that was going wrong? Or was it something else going wrong?
Thank you, Tobias. Yeah, first of all, I would just like to use the opportunity to congratulate the organizers, because I think it's the first opportunity that only women, mostly, are speaking in the concluding panel of the event. So this would be the recommendation: more active women in politics, and business life would be much better or easier for your negotiations in Albania or maybe in Macedonia. So no, I was very shocked, really, about the events last night. This is simply unacceptable. It's a shame. It's an attack on democracy. It's a serious attack on members of the parliaments, and I expressed also my solidarity with friends and colleagues that it's something that we have to really, with all efforts, condemn. And I'm really deeply concerned with the development, so not only in Macedonia, also elsewhere. If we look at what is the situation in the Western Balkan, on one hand, and on the other hand, of course, European Union doesn't have much power currently to offer anything concrete. Before was mentioned the debate we had about democracy with Orban. I mean, what Orban is doing, and I would say it's not far from what we are experiencing in Macedonia, but what Orban is doing is sweeping out civil society from the country. This is something which is really a shame for Europe, and we are allowing it. With the new proposed ban, he is actually banning funds. He is taking away freedom of university, of academic life. This is all violation of basic EU fundamental values. So this is what is happening also in the region, and I think here is very crucial and important role of civil society and of NGOs to be actively engaged from bottom to the top, to really be a watchdog of activities of the governments and of private sector. So looking to the region, one common denominator, or several of them, if you just look the reports of the Commission. First of all, it's a huge despair of people, brain drain of young, leaving the countries because they lack the vision. Difficult economic, unstable political situation, organized crime, corruption, the freedom of media deteriorating in all the countries. Then, not to speak even about the growing nationalism and even radicalization. This is the environment we are talking about in the region. So we have huge challenges that we have to breach. So my appeal would always go in the direction to focus on the young people, to focus on youth, to education, because the young people are maybe this generation that will manage to establish better life. And talking about what European Union, not to be just critical, I have here the numbers I just brought from Brussels, how much money giving to the region. I don't know if you are aware, just last year, from European funds, more than 430 million euros went to the region. To Albania, 82 million euros. This year, around 80 millions. And a lot of this money is actually last sum pledge for the rule of law and democracy. A lot of money. So now the results, we see what is happening. My suggestion would be, because you know that the Commission is still struggling because of the statements of Juncker, no enlargement for 5 years. We see that the process is very technical, closing, opening the chapters, not tangible, people don't feel it anymore. There is really distrust in EU integration policy. I think, and this should be my recommendation also to institutions and the Commission, we have to start thinking out of the box. We need to be more creative. It's not only about this technical process. What we are doing on the ground is really to improve life of citizens. With every single reform, be it rule of law, what is happening, be it judicial reform in Albania that people are praising, it's extremely important for better life. And if you look last 20 years in the region, actually, we can be proud on many achievements because there was quite significant progress. But we have to also be aware that peace and stability that we achieved and all the high EU fundamental values are currently at stake. I'm coming from Slovenia, you know, we are living in the reality that we have slowly all borders closed. Border to Austria, with the statements of Austrian minister to have indefinite interior border control. On the other hand, new Schengen rules with border controls to Croatia. And you have an impression Schengen is falling apart. If Schengen will fall apart, if the freedom of people, of movement, of capital, of people will fall apart, I think this is the beginning of destruction of European Union. And that is what we have to bear in mind. Also as politicians or as civil society or as media, what role do we play? Let us be honest. Our role is extremely important to keep this stability in the region. And we have to all contribute to that because too much is at stake. So this would be maybe appeal to all of us that are here to bring this message out of this room and of these panels, to just be human beings when we get out and to share good values and lead with the example, whatever we do.
Thank you, Dania. Out of the box. I mean, haven't we started to thinking out of the box a long time ago and we never really managed to leave the box? And again, we are sitting here in a box, Hedwig. Have we actually managed in this forum to move out of the box with our recommendations? And actually, hearing what Tanja, what Ulrike, what Mailinda said, and also quite some critical remarks to the role of, you know, readiness and preparedness of civil society, the remarks of Tanja of, you know, that the stakes are maybe much higher than our concerns. How do we match this kind of work we're doing here with actually the challenges that have been laid out for us? Because if we want to manage to challenge or close the gap, there's some homework on our side maybe here as well.
Thank you. I just wrote down the sentence thinking out of the box because this is how we started these 2 days conference, and this is the buzzword we use to kind of motivate ourselves when we are starting an exercise like that, meaning or hoping that this time we will manage to come up with some different way of approaching certain issues and with innovative ideas, challenging, sexy, provocative ideas which would somehow touch the hearts and minds of those we want to communicate with. I am not that sure that we managed this during these 2 days, but basically, you know, much more efforts have to be invested into such an exercise, so that was not actually the expectation. What we wanted to do is to have enough material for further thinking, because what we discuss here is, at least when it comes to how to involve civil society in a constructive dialogue and how to make civil society part of the processes which are influencing our everyday lives, is a very, very complex and demanding process itself. And as you just raised the question about the readiness and the willingness of the civil society itself and the capacities of the civil society to participate in this. So, I mean, immediately when we say civil society, we have a huge problem, because then we come to the issue what was mentioned earlier by Ms. Bregu. What is civil society? Who is included in the civil society? How we define civil society? But I don't think that we should really waste time on definitions. We have to find every opportunity and insist on inclusive policy making. And when it comes to this process, it is a very limited process. It is a very closed process which wants to use the Berlin process, the framework, in order to exercise a model of how it could be done using the summits, using a framework which brings together decision makers sitting, the decision makers having them there sitting together with some key EU member states and basically penetrating the scene in order to establish some communication on the burning issues which are on their agenda. So it is not about, and it shouldn't be about, for the sake of communication or for the sake of dialogue. That is important, of course, to demonstrate that there is readiness, but we need a constructive relation, and critical and constructive. And the civil society should be involved because the civil society should be involved in doing the work. So it's not about civil society shouldn't be involved to hear their voices, it's so nice, maybe include in some papers that they were there. Civil society should be involved in the everyday work of the administration in order to help it was mentioned in the previous panel that there is so much on the agenda of the administration to deliver within all these different initiatives and processes, and all the EU accession process is very demanding, of course. So use us, use our capacities, because what we want to communicate is that there are great opportunities there, out there. So we are not a threat. We offer our partnership and capacities to do the work together because it is also in our interest. The second issue is, of course, the issue of values, and I'm very much grateful that Felix presented this other dimension of this process, because of course we have to reflect on the values. And basically, again, we started with listing the issues and the troubles and the challenges we have in the region, because we cannot escape it. If we have developments like we have right now in Macedonia, if we have the situation we have in other countries in the region, but in the bordering EU member states as well, we are simply losing the anchor. And the level of uncertainty, it was said, I think Romana Vlahutin said at the opening, that there was always uncertainty, so it's not a fabulous new issue now what should make us very much excited. But I think, just looking at the region now, the level of uncertainty right now and the complexity of the situation, where it is like we are on our way, but actually it's not happening, and it's very much complicating the reality in the region. So, and you know, this situation of pretending that everything is fine, the situation of the status quo, us pretending that we are reforming, they are pretending that they are enlarging, and we are stuck somehow in a situation where no one anymore even thinks about rethinking the strategic vision of the region. That is frightening me, that somehow, because of this very complex situation, and because of the status quo, there is the red light is not there saying, hey, a new strategy is needed, because it's very difficult to come to the point where the red light will start being very, very noticeable. So I don't want to take any more time. What I would just like to say at the end is that I think that it is so important that the European Parliament is involved in this specific process basically from the very beginning of it. It is a very important demonstration of support, and also it can help us showing what modalities there can be for a successful communication. And what I think we have to promote is that we have to think about the scenarios which are likely out there, and to try to co-shape and to influence the developments together. And that should be the main message. And with considering us as partners with whom the burden and the complex setting of the tasks can be shared.
Hedwig, red lights. Red lights. There was one important actor, and we talked about it yesterday night, who was actually quite good at red lighting when things were going wrong. And Ardian said it was actually the American sun, and it was only the European moon putting some light here into the region. And if the American sun is actually getting clouded, the red lighting functions are also becoming weaker. I think we have seen it with the Central European University. I mean, an attack against an American-based institution of that kind of dimension on the territory of the European Union, and the half-hearted response, or at least a late and maybe less half-hearted response, let's see what comes out of the Timmerman initiative, shows us that the sun is not shining as strong as it used to shine. For an organization Albania, in the kind of scenario that was pinpointed also by Linda, for us who had the privilege and the honor to be here for 2-3 days and to engage in discussions about the situation in Albania, how do you bridge, Ardian, the gap between your work and the ordinary citizens in Albania?
because there seems to be also a gap emerging. It's not only the gap between the European Parliament and civil society, which may be the easiest to close, but how do we actually close the gap between the work we are doing on this panel, and for those who see it maybe on TV, how do you make sense for them out of what we are discussing?
I believe this is one of our biggest challenges, and I hope to be as close as I can to the truth by saying that we try to be useful to them. In the sense that while we are privileged to share this platform here with EU politicians, not every citizen in Albania or in the remaining Western Balkan 6 has this opportunity. So if we are committed enough, smart enough to get their voice and bring it here and transpose it in a way that can be also useful, because it is a two-pronged approach for the politicians, for the decision makers, I think we have done our modest contribution. So being useful to the citizen and being useful to the decision makers. This is our challenge. Coming back to this forum, I believe that the design of the Tirana Civil Society Forum supports this, this endeavor that we have been following. Basically, we like to say that through the Berlin process, we are profiting from what we call the repoliticization of enlargement. And by engaging regularly, not only through projects or call for applications, and don't smile when I talk about calls for applications, but when we go beyond this towards meaningful decisions about how to set up the agenda, how to discuss together, how to identify new ways of dealing with enlargement or with accession, we have made our voice more relevant and our contribution more meaningful. And here I have absolutely to thank the European Parliament. Ms. Lunacek has been present in all the forums of the civil society that I've taken note of. Maybe Belgrade not, but I mean, I remember you are in Belgrade, yes, as well. Tanya Fayon, Mr. Fleckenstein. So basically, we have found a fantastic and very valuable partner and ally in bringing the voice of our citizen higher up. Ms. Bregu has been also one of the best illustrations of how the national members of the parliament has been engaged with us. How we can move from here. So basically, and how we can be stronger. If we want to be stronger and more meaningful, I think that we have to do two things. The first one, to provide an input that is useful to the citizen, but also to the decision makers. Here, we were very proud to hear Mr. Gerg mentioning our contribution in monitoring the Berlin process. And if this is something that has served or that has helped focus this discussion or keeping the governments accountable about their commitments that they have had in Vienna or in Paris, we are very happy to have done this. I'd like also to mention the amazing paper of our BIEPAC colleagues that they presented in the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago, which is also a very concrete and meaningful contribution of bringing the Balkans problematics to the heart of decision making. The second point has to do with how strong we are. I'd like to mention that the logic of supporting civil society in the Balkans through projects must adapt to the 21st century logic. So we need to not to adapt our action to whomever or whatever donor think is good for the country, but to what we believe, we know, we implement, we live with in those countries. And in this period of very high uncertainty, I believe that more than everything, we need some strong gestures, some significant and meaningful gestures, and thinking out of the box. I want to mention two ideas, 2 initiatives. One I've stolen from Ms. Fayon, with your permission. The first one would be about roaming fees. I mean, a couple of days ago, there are no roaming fees between EU member countries, which is a fantastic thing and a fantastic achievement of the European Commission. Why we should pay roaming fees, citizens of the Western Balkan 6? I mean, it costs nothing. And it increases citizen connectivity, people connectivity. I would like very much to raise this issue and to see what we can do. I mean, is it feasible? And the second one that you have mentioned in this meeting that you've called with Mr. Bogovic in Brussels last July, what about the tuition fees of Western Balkan students when they study in EU universities? I mean, in some countries they pay the same amount, but in some other countries they pay 3 or 4 times more. I mean, if we want to invest in youth, I mean, let's give them this opportunity. Let's treat them as equal with their friend that sits next to them in the same bench. So this is another idea that we would like very much to present as out of the box. We are thrilled to have come through here, to have gone through this forum. However, we have been planning our next step. I mean, we like to think a little bit on long term, and we look forward to our next activity of monitoring the Berlin process that we do regularly every October. And we welcome the support of the European Parliament, Ms. Fayon and Mr. Fleckenstein. And this is all what I wanted to say for my contribution. Before closure of the panel from Tobias, I would like just to mention the fact that the statement for the from the forum is ready, and Mr. Blažen Malevski will read it for all of us.
Okay, you want to do this now? Okay, then because the panel is not closed, we have now actually, it's about you. So, maybe if you now introduced it, Blažen, you just quickly read the message from this forum on what has happened in Skopje, and also, of course, we invite also our panelists here to associate themselves with this statement, which would make the message from civil society together with European parliamentarians probably more stronger and actually be a little example of closing the gap.
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It means a lot for Macedonian civil society organizations to have support from all of the region. So the short statement reads the following. Regarding the situation of civil society in Macedonia, we would like to raise our deep concerns about the ongoing witch hunt on members of civil society organizations. Hindering civil society organizations to fully operate only weakens Macedonia's democratic capacities. Civil society organizations are an integral part of democratic procedures, and their rights to voice opinions and operate freely should be respected. In that regards, the Civil Society Forum Tirana wants to send their support to the civil society organizations in Macedonia and the whole region. So that's the short statement, and thank you.
Thank you. I think there are no real objections to this, so we can actually release this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think this was quite something here, and we had actually a very productive atmosphere for 1.5, 2 days, and I think I feel a bit of a grounding here. We have our colleagues coming from Brussels, coming from the debate yesterday or these days with Viktor Orban and on other very heavy issues. We have the grounding of the situation in the parliament here. We have the grounding of the parliament in Skopje, etc. So there's something to be discussed, and I'm sure that there's something you want to ask or you want to contribute now. I take 2, 3, 4, 5 markers from here. We have a lot of almostness. We have really something about red lights, which require also out-of-the-box approaches. But also, as Ulrike said, it's who are we addressing actually our recommendations to in this Berlin process? Are we actually advising the right people? Are we talking to the right people? Is it actually the right public we are talking to in Trieste, the 6 Western Balkan countries, asking them all the ideas we have? The floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and raise your hand. All right. Sonia. Okay, I'll do it like this. This is always the best. I'll come to you.
Sonia Licht, Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence. First of all, I want to thank the members of the European Parliament to be with us today. And I hope that from here, we will leave with a determination, stronger than ever, that a dialogue, a social dialogue, and political dialogue between the representatives of different European institutions, national institutions of the member states, and the broad civil society of the Western Balkans is absolutely necessary. While listening to you, I remembered a verse that I didn't think of for a very long time. It was a song in the old socialist Yugoslavia, very popular, that said, "Ko ne čuje vetar, slušat će oluju." Those who don't hear the wind will hear the storm. I'm afraid that this is exactly what we are living nowadays. Take Macedonia. In 2015, in the Vienna summit, we had many representatives of the Macedonian civil society who were in the streets. A different crowd than the one who broke yesterday into the temple of democracy. That was a grassroots civil society. I remember when at one point they said, "We tried everything, didn't work." Very few paid attention to what was happening in Macedonia. Very similar voices coming then from Bosnia and Herzegovina. You remember the grassroots movement in Bosnia and Herzegovina, 2014, 2015. Then, right now, you have a movement in Serbia. And you will have movements everywhere. My question is, in fact, very much on the line of what Hedwig just said. I mean, in fact, she talked today twice. And both times, it was the same line of thinking. We have to also rethink ourselves with the civil society. We happen to find ourselves in between something which is a popular protest, and some, they would say populist, but we call populism everything nowadays, and it's becoming dangerous. A popular protest, and the other one are the decision makers, and we are in between. And I'm afraid if we don't rethink our own role in trying to mediate between those two levels, we will also fall victims, I must say, of our own short-sightedness. It is difficult, of course, because donors are very often designing the game, etc., but it is absolutely necessary. I want to ask you, Ulrike and Tanya, coming from an institution which in fact is less bureaucratic, and I think with more chances than some other institutions, let us have it as a recommendation. Try to open the European Parliament much more to the voices of real people, including this part of the civil society. Let us have a real dialogue where we will listen to each other, not only listen to one side and then that side leaves and the other side is wondering what did we achieve. And second, I really think that it is absolutely necessary, that is part of our recommendations for Trieste, to go back to the declaration of 2015 about bilateral disputes and try to find ways how to intervene in a very vulnerable situation in the Western Balkans, out of the box, before we will see Macedonian scenarios all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm collecting a couple of statements. I had some more people who wanted to take the floor. No. One wants to take the floor? Ah, there.
stand. Can I hold it, please? Okay. Good day. My name is Adnan Čermagić from the European Stability Initiative from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I wanted to continue on what Ms. Fajon said, that the EU has nothing concrete to offer to the region. And I was thinking maybe sometimes it's not about not having something new or concrete to offer, but that what you are offering today to the Western Balkan is not enough or is not adequate for the needs of the region. And I was thinking about the figures that you've given about how much the EU spends money in the region, and I was thinking about this budgetary period you have for 6 Western Balkan countries and Turkey from pre-accession funds. It's the same amount of the money for these 7 countries that Bulgaria has access through cohesion fund. And the difference between these 6 and Turkey and Bulgaria is enormous. Also, I wanted to say that the trade deficit between the 6 Western Balkan countries and EU 28 in past 10 years has been around 80 billion euros. And the investments in some countries of this region are 6 times smaller than what diaspora sends to them, for example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina or in Kosovo. So the economic situation in these countries is very difficult, is very challenging, but at the same time, the offer we are getting in the past couple of months from the EU is that we should pursue single economic space or the customs union in the region. And I have to admit that any more detailed analysis of the proposals shows first that it's very complex to do it, that it takes time, that it takes new institutions, investment of the money, political energy, and all the other things, and that the result, both the economical and political, does not necessarily or does not lead to any significant positive developments. I don't want to give you details, but we can maybe discuss it later, and it might be interesting for you to actually question also the Commission's proposals, but also the idea as it is in the European Parliament, if it is really something that we should invest in energy. Because what I fear, and it's similar to what I see in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where I come from, is that the EU very often comes with new ideas, new initiatives. We invest quite a lot of energy, but then in the end, the result is not there. And then we go to the usual prejudices or shallow interpretation that it's Bosnian politicians who are to blame for that, or that it's the situation there that is. And then we end up in a situation where people are dissatisfied and disillusioned with what the EU means and what the EU could offer. So I would invite you to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Very concrete question also about trade relations and the actual meaning of these 420 million.
My question would be, what about youngsters in Kosovo? We are tired of being the most isolated in the region, and it is fair from the European Union to let the right for freedom of movement in the hand of 120 parliamentary members. And in this regard, what can civil society organization from Kosovo do to improve or to contribute in this specific issue?
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Ms. Kranara Goshi, I'm come from a civil society organization in Kosovo.
I'm ready to collect one more comment, statement, question. Otherwise, I'll go back to the panel. Oh, there, good. There's one more. And then we go for a second round.
Okay, hello. I already presented myself earlier, but just briefly, Milena Lazarević from Belgrade. Just a comment to Ms. Bregu related to your observation about the lack of proactivity on the part of the Albanian civil society in the work of the Council for European Integration in Albania. I just wanted to say that from my experience in the Serbian civil sector, very often the lack of proactivity and lack of initiative in such bodies, in such councils, organs created by the state actually results from the fact that the civil society doesn't really trust the state, doesn't really trust that this is a genuine model and genuine mechanism for coordination and consultation. We've seen numerous examples, numerous cases where the government would organize a certain council or organize a working group or organize very good consultations with the civil society on specific either legislative issues or even wider processes. But then when the civil society representatives really take the time and make the genuine effort to produce inputs, to produce comments, to work together with the government, in the end, the government doesn't, first of all, provide feedback on what has been accepted, what has not been accepted. And this is where I go back to the problem which Hedvig talked about, which is inclusive policy making. We cannot have inclusive policy making if the government doesn't take upon itself as an obligation to respond to the civil society, to say what has been the result of a specific consultation process. And then, of course, it is very easy for the government to dismiss the civil society as inactive or simply passive when the civil society stops being an active participant in such processes. So creating a culture of dialogue takes time, and it takes a lot of confidence, a lot of trust on both sides. And I think that it is primarily the role of the government and of the government institutions, including the parliaments, to nurture that atmosphere of trust and atmosphere of let's say, constructivism, which takes time to be built. It takes time to be created. So I don't have a question. This was just a short comment.
Thank you. Then I'll take the last one. I have Nicola, or is there someone else who is still? No. Then I'll take the last one because we're running out of time.
Yeah, very briefly. As you can imagine, I'm quite shaken up with the events in Macedonia, so I'll try to take out my diplomatic chip that I've been working on all these years in my former life as a diplomat. I think what we witnessed last night, this is a brutal attack against democracy, and what's, I think, most important for the stability of ethnic relations, in a way demonstrates what happens when the world, but in particular the EU, and not the European Parliament, I have to give you credit for that, hopes that somehow indulging a little autocrat can bring stability. It doesn't. Strong men in the region make institutions weak. We have tried with strongmen once, we have tried it twice, you know. It simply doesn't work. And this hope that somehow, you know, I mean, it's praising them for their pro-EU talk and turning a blind eye to their pro-power, state capture tendencies in the region is not really helpful. The title of this session is Connecting with Citizens. Once you don't call a spade on most fundamental basic values like freedom of the media, like rule of law, impunity, corruption, you lose the citizens, and those are the core constituency of the European project, both in Europe and in the Western Balkans. If you don't have a leverage in terms of accession appetite, be honest. And I mean, I'm sorry you're here. I know both of you are very honest. And the Parliament is doing a much better job than other European institutions and many member states. But honesty helps. And the Priba report that was published, commissioned by the European Commission, composed of, drafted by a group of independent experts, it really had an impact in a country where, because of the name issue with Greece, the EU has no leverage whatsoever. Honesty helps.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, this leaves us with a couple of minutes for a round of responses to quite complicated questions, I would say, as well. I suggest we go in reverse order, so that you start, Ardian, to see what kind of thing you want to react to, and then we move backwards to end with Majlinda. You want to react to some of the questions? No. Okay, Hedvig?
Maybe just echoing these keywords, the lack of trust, the presence of fear, and the credibility of institutions, the credibility of the EU accession process, and honesty. You asked me, and Sonia raised the issue of how civil society should also reflect on itself. I mentioned that I consider the issue of analyzing the civil society itself quite useless at this moment. On the other hand, this is the key point, what Sonia was raising as well, that the parts of the civil society have to take responsibility for certain actions and have to take a more constructive role. There are other parts who can balance that with other types of actions. So a new balance should be somehow established among civil society. In the previous times where we had serious problems, at least I will go back now to Serbia, it was like us and them. There was one man, the clear enemy. It was so easy comparing to the today's situation to fight against that one enemy. I was speaking about the complexity of the situation now, and I would like to emphasize it again. It is frightening how complex the situation is, and then I will go back to Nicola's comments. Because it is not like there are us defending democracy and there are the international actors supporting us in defending democracy, but they are like playing around and supporting the other side. So these are some of the key issues, and I think that we have to keep them in mind and start dealing with them, because fear is back on the streets. Fear was the main word present in the pre-election campaign in Serbia.
Thank you. Tanya. There was one concrete question on Kosovo, but I think there's also the one on crashing.
I will try to summarize 2 or 3 points. First, on the EU's leverage, what Nicola was saying. I mean, let us be honest, in the absence of this common European approach, or because of the several crises we are going through in the European Union, the region became a playground of different geopolitical interests. This is what is happening, and this is what is also at stake in the region. But on the other hand, I just yesterday read a new Eurobarometer that is showing that people are extremely concerned, Europeans, about the recent geopolitical development. And because of that, they would like to see more European approach, especially when it comes to some 15 key areas, mostly security, migration, etc. So Europeans, after Trump or after Brexit, or because of the geopolitical developments recent, they really want to see more Europe on key areas. This is the answer in most of the countries. I was quite surprised how significant the increase in belief in European integration is, almost to the numbers before the crisis in Europe. You can find this research was yesterday published. On the money you were mentioning from Bosnia and Herzegovina, I don't want to be misunderstood. The EU has nothing concrete to offer. I was saying more that in the political sense, because this tangible that was maybe, I don't know, visa-free regime or something that people can really feel, this time is somehow now very gloomy because of the situation also in the EU. But concretely, there are a lot of good initiatives in the region. It's also a lot of money provided. And yesterday I had a chance to speak with high official in Brussels from the Commission, who told me there is money for the projects, but we don't have good projects concretely from Albania. On one hand, they blame us, do more for us. There is money, but we don't get good projects to channel this money to the country. So this is also something to think. There are always different sides of the coins. And just briefly, that I will not take too much time, but I'm happy to discuss further on Kosovo. You know, I'm a rapporteur on a visa-free regime. This is so sensitive and so complex file that I'm rather very frustrated about the development. I know that rhetorics in Kosovo is now we have to give land away to get a visa-free regime. It's wrong. It's also, I mean, I sometimes am really frustrated about the communication of the politicians, because they use it for blame game or for, I don't know, discussing who will go for the elections and sharing the power. I honestly wish to see Kosovo as soon as possible part of visa-free regime, because it's for the citizens. And citizens are the victims of this politics in Kosovo also. And discussing the border demarcation, you heard many of my statements. It is a condition. It was, or it has been agreed also by the Kosovo government. And here we as institution cannot do much about it. Even though one can always question whether this condition is fair or not, but it is there. And I wish that there would be some positive development and or find an alternative, but then alternative has to be agreed in Kosovo. And as long as there is no joint alternative and initiative coming from Kosovo, from the politicians, then it's also difficult for us to move ahead. But I do hope that we will find some positive momentum that we can deliver this free movement to Kosovo.
Thank you. Ulrike.
Yeah.
A couple of leftovers still from the
yeah,
floor
I,
here.
I also, as rapporteur for Kosovo, and Tanya and myself work a lot together on the visa issue and have been doing that. I can just follow up on what Tanya has just been saying. I mean, since I've been rapporteur for Kosovo since 2009, I've heard that, and then 2010 and 11, when all the other countries got visa-free travel, it's been every time I visit, it's every question I get. And I'm really frustrated as well. But now I have to tell you, I'm also more frustrated on Kosovo actors not delivering. Because I have the feeling that as much as we tell them and explain and say it doesn't help yelling, it's not fair, yeah? Also, EU is as it is, yeah? And I try to tell them, I mean, sometimes I have the feeling that Kosovo, also politicians, be it government or opposition, think that Kosovo is the navel of the world or of Europe and are not seeing what's happening around. Tanya has explained very well the geopolitics that are happening with Brexit and Trump inside the EU. The only issue that many governments care for is security and stop terrorist attacks. Rightly so. I think the way they're doing it sometimes isn't the best. But so Kosovo simply is not the center of attention, even though some of us would like it to be, yeah? It's also, we've had now visa-free travel, and I'm glad about that, for Georgia and Ukraine. And Kosovo should have been on the table with that. But we cannot push ahead if Kosovo Assembly doesn't deliver. And parties, government and opposition, government who signed it in Vienna 2 years ago, when is it already, yeah? The agreement, but also opposition or politicians from Kosovo government parties not wanting to sign it. I mean, this, as Tanya has said, yeah, it's not true, this sort of giving land for visa-free travel. I mean, they have to sign it in order to get visa-free travel. And I think this visa-free travel is so essential for citizens. It's basic. The requests I get to intervene in not just my own Austrian ministry or embassy in order to get visa for other embassies as well, every day I get some, yeah? It's really, it hurts. And I mean, I'm not the one who is suffering from it, but it hurts. I feel angry, yeah, that it's not moving ahead. So I'd like to ask you also to push your politicians to go ahead with it, yeah? And then maybe try to change the thing with Montenegro. I don't mind, but the time is running out, yeah? The EU member states, and it's the ministers of the interior, it's the ones who focus on security issues. And it's also about image of Kosovo, yeah? It's not the best, I'm sorry to say, yeah? So this is where you can be active, and I know that many of you from civil society are, yeah? It's not to you personally, yeah? But it is something that has to be delivered now by Kosovo Assembly, period. And then it's up to us, and Tanya and myself and many others will push our own ministers of the interior, and Kosovo has to do that as well then to move ahead. And then I'm optimistic that it will come. But now the ball is in the hands of the Kosovo Assembly. So, yeah. Sorry, I get emotional about
We talked
that as
about the
well.
quality of parliamentarism in this region before. So,
okay.
a little bit of a catch-22 situation to
is.
close the gap, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but yeah, there also parliamentarians have to play a role.
Let's come
and
to
I
this.
also I also sometimes have to vote for things that I find is the thing I like better than the other one, but it's not ideal. Yeah, sort of the lesser evil. Yeah, sometimes you as a politician you have to decide for that. Yeah, because nothing is perfect, unfortunately. Yeah, it would be great, and we wouldn't need politicians either, if the world were ideal. Anyway, now. Yes, let me just it wasn't really a question, it was more like, yeah, Sonia, the thing, I mean, trying to open the European Parliament much more to real people. You know, I mean, one thing that we are doing to real people that are politicians is there is quite a few of seminars, I think, with parliamentarians from the region, which I think we could also make them more interactive, because sometimes they aren't yet, but at least this is a step forward to cooperate more among now parliamentarians. That's one thing. The other thing that I found when I was thinking about what kind of suggestions, apart from, I like Ardian's, I mean the roaming thing and the, what's the other one? The tuition fees, yeah? That is something I think we can also take with us to the parliament. But for example, what I was thinking with also the civil society initiative, and the thinking, making initiatives out of the box, and also to the parliament, but also to the council, yeah, is, for example, from civil society, not just always doing the conferences, but doing creative artistic things, and I know they're happening anyway, and present, like push to present some of that at a council meeting in, Council of the European Union in 2018, yeah? As something where to show a different part of civil society, yeah? The creative part, be it film, be it, I don't know, some theater, some part of that. Because sometimes it helps to get also politicians to move something in your head or in your heart, to understand something that just by talking isn't understood. That's one thing I thought of. And one thing I'd like to say to Nicola, and I said that I think at the beginning, this issue, as you said, the strong men, yeah? I mean, this is, and the authoritarian thinking, nationalist thinking, which excludes others, be it other ethnic groups, be it other, whatever who's seen as other. With many men, it's even women, yeah, or whoever. This is really an essence, and there, I would like to reiterate what I said before, strong words are needed in the public, also from the EU side, yeah? And also now with Macedonia, yeah? And really not just accepting or like of pretending that things are fine anyway. You mentioned Serbia. I think same thing for Serbia. I find it really not okay that, I mean, Serbia is the strongest, the biggest country in the region, that's true, yeah? Also economically one. But in that sense, thinking that things are fine, yeah, is simply the wrong thing to do. Yeah? And there also the issue of not accepting criticism, also from Prime Minister, well, not President Vucic, is a really problematic thing, yeah, with this authoritarian thinking of those strong men. And I'll end with something that I feel still is part of many in the EU, not all, governments, but also some in Commission, this issue that we need stability, and that's why democracy, maybe we close one eye and turn a blind eye on some of the issues that are not working. That was the big mistake that the EU was doing for years with Northern Africa. And that's why the Arab Spring started. Unfortunately, not with the results we would have wanted to see. And I'm not comparing the Western Balkans now to Northern Africa, but the issue of how do you deal with the necessity for, yes, certain economic and social stability and political stability, but at the same time not endangering the necessity of democracy and rule of law. That is really a problem that we still see, and I still see at quite a few inside the European Union. And that we need to tackle strongly, and that's why we need you as well.
Mm-hmm. So, my Linda, back to the ground. Many of us will not be here tomorrow, but you will be here. And there's an issue of trust and building trust between civil society and parliament. You have the last word.
Thank you. Let me go back a little to the situation, the geopolitical situation in the region. Whoever was in doubt during all these years what a shrinker role of EU could bring to the region, here we have the results. And this is not a sudden situation. The game of smoke and mirrors have been played since years by what Ulrike calls strongmen or leaders of this region. And on the other hand, this horse trading of democracy for stability in the region was a win-win game for both sides. European side, I would say, and our governments as well, or our politics in here. So all of us who had that feeling some time ago and years ago and were preaching and asking for a deeper role of the European and a deeper, higher EU leverage in the region, and for the EU enlargement to move ahead, and for not blocking it, and for not creating artifacts for that. Here we are today, and we see that the region is almost in flame everywhere, even if you would like to use it as a metaphor for some countries that are not in flame today. I'm pretty much afraid of that because we all know that this region goes as in a chain. When one parcel is not working well, then the other parts of it as well will not work well. So I really look forward and hope for strong messages and for a deep understanding on what's going ahead and how risky it will be if it's not stopped right now. Then it will bring me back to what Ulrike said at the beginning. The undefinite role of the political families as well. I wouldn't go too much in details for that, but I still believe that when a party is a member of one big political party, whatever group is that one, it should stay keen to the values of that political group. But if they are bridging those values and one of those or some of those are seen with indifference, silenced, okay, we can deal all the questions, we can deal with Orban, we can deal with Gruevski, I'm talking on the EPP family, for example. We can deal with some other stupid, if stupid is the right words, guys and leaders somewhere else, then you will see that the democracy will evade. I was having yesterday a meeting with the co-web people in Tirana, and I said if I were Brussels, I would have put another priority to Albania and to our countries, which is the democracy among or within political parties. Because the democracy at the level of democracy within the political parties, it will give you the clue and it's the sample of how the government of tomorrow will be and how transparent that will be to citizens. Now let me come to the comment that you made. First, I think that I have to argue you on that. I don't think that power is something that is offered freely by anybody, be it a politician or even in our daily relations. As a humankind, we don't offer power. You have to grab it. And civil society has a lot of power, but I don't think that they really have grabbed it. They haven't yet considered themselves quite independent, not afraid. And to have that freedom of thought, I'm quoting Ulrike again, that they should have for our countries and in our countries. Especially this is heard when you feel that there is a weakness and they are not really participating highly or reacting immediately when issues and problems that are of public concern are happening. And I think that you have a lot of cases in your countries. We do have a lot of cases in our country as well. So I don't expect those 5 persons that are representing 5 different NGOs and organizations in the National Council for European Integration in Albania, which is a consultative body. And we are not government. So we are parliament. And there it's parliament, it's independent institutions, as I said, it's media, it's university people, it's business, it's general prosecutor, it's whoever. So it's not a state body. It's a mixed body of all the national actors. I don't think that they should wait for the trust to be built. They should challenge every state institutions. If you don't challenge, if you are not felt, if you are not aggressive, if you don't ask for more, if you don't give ideas, then it's going to be quite difficult at the very end. So that's what I would suggest humbly to those persons who still tomorrow will be here with me. So Albanian civil society organizations, but I would say not only.
Thank you. This doesn't it does conclude our panel, but I don't think it does conclude our conversation. 51 minutes ago, Tanya tweeted, "The abyss." Now, the abyss is maybe a more dramatic word for a gap, so I think we need to have a conversation of how we not fall into the abyss. But it also shows that the stakes are a bit higher than they used to be. And you know that Facebook has this wonderful function of reminding you what was happening a year ago or 2 years ago. And this morning I woke up and I got this poster that the German artist Wolfgang Tillmann made in view of the Brexit referendum 1 year ago in June. And it said, "What is lost forever." And I think we have seen how quickly this goes when we look at the relationship, for instance, of us inside the European Union with our friends and colleagues from the United Kingdom, what the relationship has turned into. And I think what is lost forever. This is a risk that can even encounter us in the relationship with the Western Balkan countries. Because the fragility is there, and it's actually for us and our work here, and that's why I'm saying it opens a new chapter of the conversation to make this relationship and this gap, close this gap and make the relationship more resilient. Thank you very much, and I invite you to play a round of applause for our panelists, and Hedwig is going to close.
And please remain seated, just a few more words as the official closure of this conference. This was the 5th Civil Society Forum here in Tirana. While I was listening Ms. Lunacek mentioning creative approaches, using art, etc., and then insisting by all of us on out-of-the-box thinking, it has reminded me on our initiative from a previous position of mine 13 years ago, going to the European Parliament and presenting a book called The Best Stories from the Visa Queue, where we invited young people from the Southeastern European region to describe their stories while they were waiting for getting a visa for an EU member state. That was part of the visa abolishment campaign, which my organization then, the Citizens Pact for Southeastern Europe, was running. And that was only one exercise. Then in 2006, I invited Olli Rehn to the Exit Festival, and he was playing football in the camp of the festival, and he was debating with us about the visa issue. And then Sonja Licht reminded me yesterday that we need those new, young, courageous people in the civil society who can do things like that. Because today I would not do it, because I would not believe that Olli Rehn would come to the Exit Festival. That time I just invited him because I thought that he will, and he did. So this meeting was not one of these out-of-the-box events. However, we do have certain proposals which are very much out of the box. We were listening today about a proposal for a Raiko coffee chain, which could really give life to this very important new regional initiative. There were other creative ideas. Now we were listening about abolishing the roaming for the region, including it into this EU roaming-less system, because basically we are paying for the providers, so I mean it shouldn't be that difficult. However, now I really want to close this meeting, and then I will give the floor to our local host to close it finally. And just to thank you for coming, thank you for being disciplined and patient and very constructive and productive. The results from this forum were envisaged to be the starting point for further discussions, including a broader civil society from the region, but also from Italy, having the final recommendations, policy recommendations, should travel to Trieste, and there we should find ways how to communicate, how to best communicate them to the decision makers. We heard the question whether we communicate to the right ones, where we have only them. So we will have to communicate with those who are there. So after this meeting, this material, what we produced here, will be further elaborated by the Balkans and Europe Policy Advisory Group, whose representatives were here. There will be an online consultative process published on the website, the official website of the Civil Society Forum, to which we will invite a broad group of people, of course, everyone who is interested to comment, to discuss. There will be a certain platform which is making it possible to discuss, like in a cafe, and to contribute to the final shaping of these recommendations. And we invite also the Italian civil society to participate together with us in discussing these issues. Then we will organize another forum in Trieste, the annual Civil Society Forum, which is always linked to the political summit, the Western Balkan Summit, because we consider that our presence there is very important. We had different challenges in the previous years. We also have financial, of course, issues. There is always a very limited number of people who can be invited. This year, because it is in Trieste, we think that we will be able to make this group a bit bigger, because maybe that is our last chance to do it like that. Next year in London, I am not that confident that due to visa issues and due to the expenses, it will be possible to plan a very similar presence and activity. So Trieste, in that sense, for us, is important, and we are trying to be as creative as possible in order to develop their activities, which will go in line with we just discussed, which can somehow touch the hearts and minds of us participating, but also the others on the other side who have to recognize the advantages of working together with us and communicating with us. I would like to thank a lot to our local partners. I would like to thank a lot to the partners of the initiative, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and the Erste Foundation. I would like to thank a lot to my staff, especially Branka Panic, who is behind of this event in front of EFB and sitting there behind, and nobody actually noticed her because she was not on the stage and that prominent. Thank you very much, Branka. And I would also like to thank to the local staff, but I believe that Ardian will do the same. A final remark. I wish to thank to the Italian partners who are helping us shaping the Trieste event. I already mentioned them at the beginning, the representatives of EI and CESPI from Rome, and Mr. Ugo Poli from the Central European Initiative, who is, I think, really making the best to help us making it happen, because it is quite challenging. On the other hand, it is also very attractive to have us there in Trieste and to promote further this need and to achieve maybe with what we opened the Civil Society Forum yesterday, the goal, a formal goal, to have the Civil Society Forum stated as being integral part of the Berlin process, the civil society process being integral part of the Berlin process, stated in the final declaration, in order to help us in the next phase of the process and the eventual further development of the Berlin process to be integrated and to be constructively active. And my final remark is, I think that another very important issue where we have to be constructive is thinking, as it was advised in the previous panel, thinking about the future of the Berlin process and providing our proposals in time in order to influence the developments in the upcoming period. Thank you very much.
It has been a real privilege to welcome and to host you here. And thank you very much for putting your trust on us. I hope it has been justified. I'd like to thank the CDI, Cooperation and Development Institute, the local partner staff, I mean the personnel, but also those young persons that you saw around with a little badge. They come from the National Youth Council, which is a partnership of 74 youth organizations all over Albania with thousands of members. And this is one of the indicators of what we do as Cooperation and Development Institute, to go to the citizen and to talk to them. And here is a concrete example of our modest contribution. So thank you very much, National Youth Council. I'd just like to mention from the beginning that this forum has been designed as a platform of cooperation, debate, and concrete contributions between civil society and decision makers. To contribute to the fact that I'd like to make it worth your time here, I'd just like to remind you who has been amongst us and who has enriched our debate. We have had representatives from the ministries of foreign affairs from different countries, at least from that I know from Slovenia, Foreign Office, and Austria. We have had members of Albanian Parliament. Thank you for being with us, Menida. We have had members from European Parliament. We have had ministers. We have had representatives of agencies that deal with economic development and connectivity issues. We have exchanged with academicians. We have had grassroots initiatives and representatives here, media, and also a special thanks go to the efforts made by the Italian Presidency to help shape this forum, and also to His Excellency Michele Giacomelli for coming here on purpose and staying with us, is exchanging with us. Thank you again. I hope you have had a good time and you'll come back this time as tourists. You know our email address, and Esther, which I'd like to mention here, you know, we'll be here, we'll help as friends and as hosts. My last phrase, there is a lunch waiting for us outside, and for those that have that need or have planned transport for the airport, this has been arranged as well. My last thank goes to Tobias for moderating this last panel.